disputed by archaeologists. Nevertheless, there's a highly professional team from the San Diego Natural History Museum who've excavated what is called the Cerruti Mastodon site just south of San Diego. And I've been there into the museum and talked to the leading expert, Tom Desmarais. And what they found was mastodon bones that had been crushed systematically and in an organized way using some kind of stone tool to extract the marrow. And the only interpretation they're able to put upon this is that this was human beings. Whether it was other kinds of human species like Denisovans, perhaps even Neanderthals, or whether it was anatomically modern humans, all of us were around 130,000 years ago, but it's human behavior that we're looking at, the systematic killing of an animal and then the fracturing of its bones to extract the marrow. Now, of course, this is regarded as some kind of terrible heresy by archaeologists who've been wedded to the idea of a very recent settlement of the Americas for a very, very, very long time. But gradually, reluctantly, kicking and screaming, spitting nails as they go along, archaeologists have begun to accept that the peopling of the Americas happened a lot earlier than they had thought. And presently, the kind of date that is being considered, accepted in fact, by the majority of archaeologists is around 23,000, 24,000 years ago. That's White Sands, New Mexico, and the human footprints there, which we feature in episode 1 of season 2 of Age of Apocalypse. But there's a recognition that it could be older than that, could be 30,000 years old, and then there's sites in South America, which may be even older, 36,000, 40,000, 50,000 years old. So the whole issue is very much up for grabs, but the one guy who was really late to the party was Columbus.
Is the Americas often overlooked when it comes to the history of human civilization?
Yes, because there's been this prejudice that the Americas could have had nothing to do with the origins of civilization, because human beings supposedly weren't in America until it was called the Clovis First model. It was held until really about 10 years ago that no humans had been in the Americas before 13,000 years ago. So you can see that the Cerruti Mastodon site multiplies that by 10 to 130,000 years ago. But there's gradually been an acceptance of an earlier settlement than that. And they're still fighting over the Cerruti Mastodon site, whether to accept that or not. There's been a back and forth of papers in Nature, a reasonably respectful discussion going on between archaeologists who disagree over this. But yes, that model of a very late settlement of the Americas, I mean, the view is that anatomically modern humans came into Europe about 60,000 years ago, maybe 50,000 years ago. We had anatomically modern humans in Australia between 50 and 60,000 years ago as well. And of course, anatomically modern humans were in Africa going back 300,000 years. The earliest known anatomically modern human remains are from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, and they date to 310,000 years ago. And they're pretty much identical to modern humans today, and we can assume that their brains were pretty much identical as well. It may be that earlier examples of anatomically modern humans will be found. This is why one of my pet sayings is stuff just keeps on getting older, because it's not that long ago when the view was, I mean, back in the 90s, when the view was that there were no anatomically modern humans before 50,000 years ago, and then new discoveries kept pushing that back, and then it switched to about 110,000 years ago with a discovery in Ethiopia, and now more than 300,000 years ago. So who knows how far that timeline will go back. But the general view has been we will not look for the origins of civilization in the Americas because they were recently settled. And these new discoveries have to change that picture. Archaeology is very slow to change its paradigms, but this is one that is going to need to be changed. And the result is that the Americas have not been seriously studied for the specific issue of the origins of civilization, that thing that we call civilization.
What was or is the established history? What was the story that's been told by archaeologists up to now about how the Americas was settled, when, what mode, etc.?
Right. Well, the story that stuck for a very long time, like 30 or more years, was the notion that a people who archaeologists call the Clovis culture entered North America across the Bering land bridge. We call it the Bering Straits today, but during the Ice Age, and 13,400 years ago was during the Ice Age, sea level was much lower, and it was possible to cross by land from Siberia into Alaska, and thus to enter the Americas without making a sea voyage. And part of the prejudice that archaeologists did have against our ancestors is they didn't think they were capable of making sea voyages. And therefore this seemed like the most likely way that they came into the Americas. And that stuck for a very long time. And that was called the Clovis First hypothesis. And it became the subject, if I could just complete, it became the subject of a bitter battle amongst archaeologists, because there was a group of archaeologists, very powerful, very influential, very widely published, who clung on to this Clovis First doctrine that there was no culture here before the Clovis culture for a very long time. And anybody who brought new evidence to the table suggesting an older human presence in the Americas were running the risk of having their careers destroyed. And this happened in the case of several individuals. We're running the risk of being humiliated, of having funding withdrawn from their research, and so on and so forth. So that doctrine, the Clovis First doctrine, stuck until the evidence became utterly overwhelming. For example, Tom Dillahay finally managed to demonstrate, even to the most skeptical of his colleagues, that Monteverde in South America had dated at least 14,000 years ago, well before Clovis, and maybe 15 and more thousand years ago. And Jacques Cinq-Mars, this classic example, brilliant man, excavated bluefish caves in the Yukon back in the 1970s and found evidence that humans had been there 24,000 years ago. And he received the full machine gun fire of the entire archaeological profession, and they literally destroyed his career. But back in 2017, he was finally proved to be right. He was absolutely 100% right. He was worldly.
Is he still around?
He is still around, but very, very old now and retired. Broken by what happened to him.
It's interesting you talk about coming over the Bering Land Bridge into the northest of North America.
Yeah.
And then trickling down from there.
Trickling down from there.
But if you were to suggest that happens around about 13,000 years ago, let's say that the markings that were found in South America that you just mentioned were found shortly after that. That is a long way to travel. If you're starting at the top and coming down, you would presume that the disbursement would be more centered at the top as opposed to at the bottom.
Yes, you would. And archaeologists are beginning now to open up to the idea that our ancestors were seafarers. I mean, they have to be open to that idea, because even at the peak of the Ice Age, when sea level was at its lowest, it was not possible to get to Australia without a sea voyage. You just couldn't do it, and particularly when you're settling a new land, you can't just go by accident with 2 or 3 people. You have to go with a substantial group who bring the means of survival with them at that point. Otherwise, they'll become extinct very, very rapidly. And Australia was systematically settled about 50,000, maybe as much as 60,000 years ago. And undoubtedly, boat journeys were involved, and the same goes for Cyprus. Of course, Cyprus is an island today, but it was an island during the Ice Age too. It's surrounded by colossal deeps at that end of the Mediterranean, and it was never connected to the land. And yet Cyprus was settled around 14,000 years ago, and the evidence is it was a highly organized project which involved sophisticated shipping and large numbers of people carrying animals with them who settled in Cyprus. So there shouldn't be an argument that our ancestors could use ships, and it's beginning to happen now. Now that Clovis First has finally died the death it long ago deserved, archaeologists are beginning to accept that maybe human beings did use ships to come to the Americas. We don't like the idea of them doing something like crossing the whole Pacific Ocean directly. They prefer the idea that they kind of island hopped from Siberia down the coast of Alaska and thence into North America and finally into South America. But this raises one highly significant problem, which is, first of all, that the South American sites, by and large, are older than the North American sites. And secondly, and again we feature this in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, there's intriguing DNA evidence which connects the peoples of Melanesia, New Guinea, and Australian Aborigines, and certain peoples who are indigenous in Taiwan as well, which connects them directly with 3 tribes in the Amazon rainforest, in the west of the Amazon rainforest. And that particular genetic signal is not found anywhere in North America at all. And it should be, if they got there by a land route coming through North America. It's only found in South America. And the most parsimonious way to explain it, even leading geneticists admit this, although they know that it's not an idea that archaeologists are going to accept. The easiest way to explain it is that there was a direct crossing of the Pacific Ocean by sea. And since those remains that have been found are already very old, more than 10,000 years old, we're looking at a sea crossing that could have happened thousands of years before that. It's just an accidental discovery that complete skeletal remains were found that are 10,000 years old, which have this DNA signal, which is still present in the modern populations.
Pretty big ocean on either side of the Americas.
Big ocean on either side.
If you're going to sail it, it's not, I mean, Cyprus, deep, whatever, in the Mediterranean, but it's not a Pacific or an Atlantic crossing.
No, in the case of Cyprus and Australia, at the peak of the Ice Age, a large part of the Indonesian archipelago was all joined into a landmass called Sunda, and that went down as far as Timor. It was still necessary to have a crossing of open ocean of about 90 kilometers to get to New Guinea, and which was then joined to Australia. It was paleocontinental as a whole. It was about 90 kilometers, and in the case of Cyprus, it was about 50 or 60 kilometers. But the notion of human beings actually crossing the Pacific Ocean, crossing thousands of miles of the Pacific Ocean more than 10,000 years ago, is still a very tough one for archaeologists to accept. But at the same time, they can't deny the genetic evidence, so they must look for some explanation. And there's been all kinds of hysterical riddles to try to explain that anomaly. I still think the simplest explanation is the best.
You think Pacific, not Atlantic crossing?
Well, this was definitely a Pacific crossing because the connection is between peoples who live on the east side of the Asian landmass down into Australia and peoples on the west side of the South American landmass. So
that's just for the genetic component, though. Yeah. There's other people that were there. There's more evidence that's that. How did those people get there earlier than?
Well, that's an unanswered question.
Yes.
That's a completely unanswered question. There are a number of sites, all of which are strongly disputed in South America, which are much older. And how did they get there? We don't know. What has to be seriously questioned is the notion that the entry was only through North America, and that they
and only 13,000 years,
or even 23,000 years ago, and that they had to find their way through North America down to South America. And the reason that South America is not being considered as the possible first place of human habitation in the Americas is precisely because of that prejudice that, of course, our ancestors couldn't have sailed the entire Pacific Ocean.
What's interesting about the Amazon from a...
Everything is interesting about the Amazon. I love the Amazon. It's a god, or I would prefer to say a goddess. The Amazon is a force. It's an amazing and extraordinary thing. It's very tough. The heat and the humidity are intense. The insects, the snakes, the creatures that will eat you up, the piranhas in the river.
It sounds pretty inhospitable as a place that you're going to
at the same time, it's a garden in which humans can flourish, and which humans did flourish. So what's interesting about the Amazon, first and foremost, this is one of those areas of the world that is massively under-researched by archaeology. And I don't say that that's an act of irresponsibility on the part of archaeology. That's because it's incredibly expensive to go and research in the Amazon. And when you are of the opinion that you're not going to find much there, then undertaking that research has never seemed worthwhile. But new information keeps on coming in, which is changing that. I mean, statistically, we're looking about 5 to 6 million square kilometers that are still under dense canopy rainforest. And as a result, and again, this is an issue that we've gone into in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, because I think everybody knows that the Amazon is under attack at the moment, that large parts of the Amazon are being cut down and turned into soybean farms and cattle ranches. And the soybeans are primarily to feed the cattle. As a result of these clearances, strange things have begun to emerge into plain sight. And these include gigantic, perfectly geometrical earthworks. Now, if we talk about the earthworks in the UK, everybody's heard of Stonehenge or Avebury. A henge actually is an earthwork. It's the ditch that surrounds the stone circle. It's not particularly prominent in the case of Stonehenge, but it's massively prominent in the case of Avebury, a big, deep ditch with an embankment on either side. These earthworks in the Amazon, they don't have the standing stones in the middle of them because there is no stone in that part of the Amazon. But they do have these huge earthworks which can take very intriguing geometrical forms. So, for example, a perfect square with a perfect circle inside it, but on a scale of hundreds of meters. Rectangles, square enclosures with sort of scallops cut out of one corner of them. The whole thing, lots and lots of circles. Many of these structures appear to be aligned to the cardinal direction. And
what's the cardinal direction?
North, south, east, and west. And it's very important to be clear on that. North, south, east, and west on a compass are not the same as true north, south, east, and west. There's an error of 10 or 11 degrees in the compass, which is a magnetic reading. True north is defined by astronomy.
And which one does this follow?
This follows true north. True north, south, east, and west, the true cardinal directions. So anyway, as a result of the clearances, we've started to see these puzzling earthworks appearing, and that has led a team who we cooperated with in Ancient Apocalypse. The lead archaeologist is Martti Parsanen from the University of Helsinki, and his partner in the project is Alceo Ranzi, who's a very distinguished geographer from Brazil. And it was actually Alceo who was the first to spot these geoglyphs. That's what he called them, because it struck him that there was a similarity to the Nazca lines. These things are so big that you can only really see what they are when you're up in the air. And he was on a flight over and suddenly saw this and thought, what the hell is that? And that led him to begin to investigate and find that it wasn't just one. There were dozens of them that had already been produced by the clearances. And now, what Alceo and Martti are doing is a detailed LiDAR study in the areas touching on those parts that have already been cleared. They're going deeper into the jungle. And while we were there, they found half a dozen new structures under the canopy rainforest. You see, LiDAR will allow you to see through the rainforest canopy and to see relief features underneath it without destroying anything. And then you can go in very, very low tech. You can just go in, not destroy anything, and begin to investigate what the LiDAR has picked up. And what the LiDAR has picked up is these just extraordinary geometrical structures extending into the jungle as far as the range of the drone on that day. And both Martti and Alceo are of the opinion that there are thousands of these things still waiting to be discovered. And indigenous people, I spent time with an elder of the Apuina people for whom these geoglyphs are sacred. They say that there are thousands of them throughout the jungle, and they still venerate them and value them today, and that they are places that shamans use to work healing medicinal people.
How old are they?
The ones that have been found up till now go back about 2,000 to 3,000 years. And that's based on dating of organic material found in the earthworks. It's a rough guess. However, what they've found, that those precise areas on which the earthworks now stand, once you excavate down deeper than about 2 or 3 meters, you find that they have been intensely used by human beings, and there's an enormous amount of charcoal and carbon down there. And those dates, so what they're saying is that these sites actually appear to have been selected and appear to have been sacred to people for at least 10,000 years.
Yo, Sailor Curse.
The latest incarnation of them.
Always puts a smile on my face. What's up, brother?
Survived to this day. So there's a big project now going on to open it up.
How are you, my man?
I don't mean to open it up by destroying the rainforest. I mean to use LiDAR to find out what's going on there. And other results of this have included absolute confirmation that there were huge cities in the Amazon, that the Amazon did have a population before the Spanish conquest of tens of millions. This was a completely different place from a place that we imagine as kind of pristine rainforest inhabited by a few tribes of hunter-foragers. No, there were large-scale permanent settlements in the Amazon. and they were joined by perfectly straight roadways that ran in some cases for hundreds of kilometers. We are seeing the traces, literally, of a lost civilization.
Glad to see you back on Twitch, brother.
Get to grips with the dates on these. And this is just tiny bits of the Amazon that have been looked at thus far. So I'm of the opinion that the Amazon has a great deal more to tell us. And I've done my best to bring the case for that to the viewers in Ancient Apocalypse. And besides, what a privilege to spend time in the Amazon.
Over the span of about a year, I tried pretty much every green string that I could find, trying to work out which one was best. I came across AG1 and I'm stuck with it for 3 years now because it's the best. The most rigorously formulated, highly tested, and comprehensive green string that I've ever found. And that's why I put it into my body, and I've got my mum to take it, my dad to take it, and a ton of my friends as well. And if I found anything better, I would change, but I haven't. That's why I still use it. Since 2010, they've improved their formula 52 times in the pursuit of making the best foundational nutrition supplement possible through high-quality ingredients and rigorous standards. Best of all, there is a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can buy it and try it every single day for 3 full months, and if you do not like it for any reason, they'll give you your money back. So, you can try AG1 completely risk-free for 3 months, plus get a year's free supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at the link in the description below, or by going to drinkag1.com/modernwisdom. That's drinkag1.com/modernwisdom.
My first visit to the Amazon was in 2003. I was working on a book that I published in 2005 called Supernatural, Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind. It's recently been retitled as Visionary. It's still out there, but I was interested in the notion, for which credit must be given to the late, great Terence McKenna, that sampling psychedelics played a key role in the evolution of human consciousness, and that we can see the evidence for the use of psychedelics. And here I want to pay tribute to the work of Professor David Lewis Williams of the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. We can see evidence for the use of psychedelics in cave art all around the world, and in rock art all around the world, and we can see that evidence in the Amazon very, very strongly. And furthermore, shamans in the Amazon who are drinking ayahuasca, drinking the powerful visionary brew ayahuasca, after their visionary experiences, if they have painting skills, and quite a number of them do, they paint their visions. And those paintings of those visions are astonishingly similar to the paintings that you see on ancient rock faces, such as in Colombia, in the Amazon, going back more than 12,000 years, and paintings that you see even in Europe, in caves like Lascaux, where the same geometric patterns and the same strange beings that are part mixture, part animal, part human, appear. It's as though the visionary realm is being manifested in art. And I wanted to investigate that. And I had not experienced ayahuasca before, but I didn't feel I could write about it authentically without drinking ayahuasca. So I went to the Amazon, first of all, in 2003 to drink ayahuasca with an indigenous shaman, and his name is Francisco Montes Shuna. And I had my first 11 sessions with...
11 sessions?
Yeah.
First 11.
First 11. I've had subsequently had about another 70. But that was... The first 11 were for research purposes. The other 70 is because ayahuasca has helped me to get to grips with issues in my life that I didn't even know I needed to get to grips with. But it's helped me to do that. So I still feel... I think they're right in the Amazon to refer to ayahuasca as a
Yo,
teacher.
what is that?
I have learned many useful and important lessons to it. So the last time I had an ayahuasca session was actually while we were filming in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon, for season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse. And it was
peeled off from a day of shooting to go and...
and it was the same shaman, Francisco Montes Shuna, who I drank with 20 years before. So it was fascinating to be back there and to be in the midst of that majesty and surrounded by that wildness. Of course, you can drink ayahuasca pretty well anywhere in the world today, but it's better to do so in the hands of a shaman who really knows.
Cool, brother.
what
Thanks,
she's
brother.
doing. I'm not saying that there can't be Western shamans. There can, and there are some. But they need to sit down at the feet of shamans in the Amazon and learn techniques from them, because people
It's a new
can
moon
get
in
into
Scorpio today. It's a powerful new moon.
and that needs to be handled. Shamans
That's why we're all
speak
feeling
about
like
forces
low
of the air.
energy and
That's
anxious.
what their role is primarily in this.
And Mars
So it was
is
very
opposing.
interesting to have
What's
a
Mars
session.
opposing?
I was joined by my good friend Luis Eduardo Luna, who's a Colombian
Jesus Christ.
psychologist who is now based in Brazil. He's one of the
Mars
world
is
experts on
opposing Uranus.
We had some very interesting
can't
discussions
remember.
about the mysteries of this pool and the mysteries of the ayahuasca pool.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a new
Also
moon.
touch upon the questions
New
of
beginnings.
how so?
Let's get this
Well,
time.
because ayahuasca is a very complicated thing to make. It is a mixture of two.
No, Mars is opposite Pluto, I
medicinal
think.
form, which is actually called ayahuasca.
Pluto entering
That's not
Aquarius
an Amazonian word,
in
that's
the
a
next like
Quechua
month or
word,
two.
it's an Inca word. The Incas were
Me
also
too,
using
dude. Me too, brother.
ayahuasca, and they named it the
I've just been sleeping and eating
there
and
are
resting.
many local names for it, but the Inca name stuck, and everybody calls it ayahuasca now, which means the vine of souls or the vine of the dead. The vine itself has almost
Yeah, I
no
might do a
healing
weightlifting stream
properties.
tomorrow.
If you were to drink it,
Ideally, I get this time
made
tonight.
of brewing up, smashed up
We do
portions of the
weightlifting
vine,
tomorrow.
and you could drink gallons of it and you wouldn't have any visions whatsoever. The other ingredient is a leaf from a bush, and that bush is botanically Psychotria viridis. in the
Yeah,
Amazon
oh, cool,
bush
brother.
tree.
Yeah, I was
Those
not really
leaves
feeling Halloween
contain
this year. I was pretty
substantial
anxious and
quantities of
tired.
arguably the world's most powerful psychedelic, which is dimethyltryptamine, DMT. The type of DMT is called NN-DMT. And this is where it gets complicated, because DMT is not normally accessible orally.
It's good that you voted early, man.
In
You
other
get that out of the
words,
way.
you can munch
You know what I mean? I'm
several
already
kilos of those
fucking
leaves. You
exhausted
put
of
them
the
on a
election.
table, and it wouldn't have
It's not
any
even
effect.
my country.
And this is because of an enzyme called monoaminoxidase
Yes.
that we have in our gut.
Yeah, for sure, brother.
Destroys DMT on contact. That's why people who want to have the straight DMT experience today have to smoke it or vape it, smoke it in a pipe or vape it, and then it gets right through the blood-brain barrier and into the brain, but through the gut you can't absorb it orally. So how do you conquer that problem? What you need, in scientific terms, is a monoaminoxidase
Yeah.
inhibitor. You need something
I'm
that will
changing
shut
my
down
opinion.
this
It's definitely going to be
and
faster
that's
than a week.
precisely what the ayahuasca vine provides. It provides a monoaminoxidase.
I think probably
inhibitor
definitely by the
that
end
shuts
of
down
the
the
week.
enzyme in the gut and
Definitely
allows
by
the DMT
Friday.
in the leaves that are part
Definitely.
of the brew to be
But
active.
probably
Then, instead of
likely
having
like
the usual
Tuesday,
10
Wednesday.
or 12
I think
minute wave
Kamala's
breaths,
gonna win still,
trip
brother.
to the other side of reality, which is what
I
happens
think she's even more and more
DMT.
of a
You have
lock
4
to
hours
win,
trip to the
man.
other side of reality. And it's much slower paced. You have time to get to grips with what is happening and to investigate the visions that you're experiencing and the teachings that you're receiving. Sometimes you receive nothing. Sometimes all you do is just vomit and have diarrhea. That is one of the physical consequences of ayahuasca. I can say, as a result, I've been working with ayahuasca for more than 20 years now. I can say that as a result of long-term exposure to ayahuasca, the vomiting and diarrhea side have got less and less as time has gone on. But the visionary experiences continue to be.
Bro, did you see Vance?
However,
Dude.
sometimes you don't get enough.
Vance's interview with Joe Rogan? He
But
says he's
the view of
pro-life.
shamans in Peru is that nothing is the really most
Like-
important one, but you're downloading stuff.
Man,
subconsciously.
you're not gonna get many
So
voters.
They celebrate these nadas. They do this.
What's the implication
By
of
saying
having
that?
similar cave paintings from potential psychedelic cave paintings in
Like, I think
the
they're
Amazon,
done, bro. I think they're
Europe,
absolutely
elsewhere
done.
in the world?
I think Kamala's gonna win.
The story you're drawing from
The implication is that psychedelics were involved in every case, different psychedelics, but they were involved in every case. Just to finish on the case of ayahuasca, the other form of ayahuasca is called yahe, which is spelled Y-A-J-E.
And he's really condescending.
Yahe.
He was talking to his voters as if the voters were not- were like uneducated or not smart. Even his own fucking base
However, the
came off really arrogant.
is provided actually from another vine from the leaves that grow off that vine.
And from the the view of a Democrat or even a fringe voter, there's no way they'd vote for Trump. There's no way. Damn. Yeah, man.
Okay, can you compare the two?
Yeah, buddy. But I mean, how many Democrats are watching Vance's Joe Rogan? I don't know. There are some, but I'm just saying it went worse than it was supposed to go. Let's just say that.
Of course, you're not having contact with any intelligence. It's just your fantasies. It's just a hallucination. But I suggest they go and have a dozen sessions of ayahuasca first and see if that is still their view. There's something very mysterious about it, and this is a result of literally Amazonian technology. Go figure how they choose out of more than 100,000 different species of plants and trees. They find the bush with the leaves that contain DMT, and they find the vine which contains the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and they put them together.
What do you suggest?
To do that by trial and error is no easy task.
No, it's no easy task, but also given enough time and not much else to do.
It could be done. It could be done. And when I observe shamans in Mormonism today, what I notice is that they are constantly sampling plants. They're constantly sampling admixtures of plants.
My bee presses are getting better. Look at that one. That was so good.
The latest journey that I had was dropping little bits of different flowers into the plant as well.
Wow, the side boost.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that I did have an extraordinary night. And it was very, very interesting. And nobody in their right mind is going to drink ayahuasca for kicks. It's not some kind of light-hearted recreation. I would say it's definitely not recreational, especially with the physical effects. But it's also a powerful emotional journey, which will reveal to you things that you may have suppressed from yourself. And the point I often make on this is, it's very easy to be harsh and cruel with words.
And I mean, bro, I was thinking the other day,
especially when you're pretty good at words, which I am. And I've often
Trump won in 2016
I have no other skills. I can't even, put
against Clinton, right? Clinton was not
but I can
liked
I have words,
at all.
and I've realized that I've said things in moments of anger.
Is Kamala Harris liked less than Clinton? I don't think so.
And
I think Harris is liked more.
It's interesting on that point. I often think about how people that are physically
Then again,
strong,
the largest voter ever turnout was what, 2020 or whatever?
protect physically weaker people.
And it was
At the very least,
for Biden
big
and
nation
Trump.
doesn't try and fight a granddad, for instance, because there's an imbalance. But we don't have the same sense because outwardly it's not as obvious. We don't have the same sense for somebody lexically who is linguistically very capable.
No.
And you can use. Ben Shapiro talked to me about this, about how he's a professional debater, very quick with his words, so on and so forth, and he can use that to win when arguing with his wife. Yeah. But he says, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be loved?" And
exactly,
he has to temper. It's like being the real strong guy up against the granddad.
Absolutely. I would say the most important lessons I've had from my ayahuasca journey.
I can see something like 70% of women voting for
it's one thing to get the revelations,
Democrats.
To actually integrate it into your life. I mean, that's where the hard
That's
work
like a
is.
random
But
number off the top of my
I'm
head.
working on this, and I hope that I'm a kinder and more nurturing person than I was.
I want to get it. I want to talk about that because I'm particularly fascinated about the psychology of somebody that's had to deal with such consistent criticism for a long period of time.
I can see a lot of wives fucking pussy whipping their men into voting Democrat. I swear to God. But I mean, they kind of have to. This abortion bullshit. Holy fuck me, man. The Republicans are
man.
man.
We're all mortal.
Well, yeah.
When we're in our 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
we don't really
Dude,
take that into
imagine,
account.
dude.
Believe me, when you get to my age,
It's crazy. I don't think abortion has ever really been voted on nationally ever in my lifetime. In the West. Right? This is pretty much a vote for that. It's not technically, but it kind of is. Which is crazy.
I would like to be able to look back on my life and say that it was a worthwhile one, and that I did more good than I did harm, at the very least.
Anger's a young man's game in that regard.
Yeah.
What's this?
Yeah, dude, Trump and Vance they're just crazy, man. I understand. Like, I think both are fucking fascist. Trump and Kamala. I think they're both fascist, but I understand the Democrats saying Trump is a fucking fascist. He's fascist. The implementing abortion illegality in any state in the West in the United States is fucking. It's fascist. The body. Man, I guess this is on my mind a lot. It's crazy, man. I just can't. Like, why would they throw? The Republicans can't be that stupid, and the elites can't be this stupid. They're either throwing the election because of this abortion thing, or they want it to be a side distraction while Trump wins and they go to Iran for war. Which I mean is a fucking pretty good plan too. But it's like, damn.
If you're hunting a monkey, and that monkey is 100 foot up a tree, and you want it for dinner, what you don't want to do is for it to, as you shoot an arrow into it, its natural instinct will be to wrap its tail around the tree.
And I think more women may vote this fucking election because it deals with a very specific woman issue, right? So there's going to probably be more women voters. Because why wouldn't there be? Right? Like, it's crazy.
Its muscles go limp and it falls from the tree.
It's insane.
But to create curare, you need 11 different ingredients.
Why? Why would they do this? Like, why would the Republicans, like,
so that's a
man.
Project, again, from a people who have lived in their
environment big time.
For thousands, I believe tens of thousands of years, and are so familiar.
And I'm just a fucking guy.
They know.
I'm just a dude.
But I would add to that one other.
You know, I'm not like a political analyst.
Which again we go.
And even I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand the big picture. I don't know. I don't know how evangelical the United States is too. Because they place Christians and evangelicals really pretty much at the top. Not there's anything wrong with Christians, like, or their beliefs. There's a lot. I disagree a lot of their like practices in the religion, like every religion, but
Terra Preta has allowed.
Doesn't mean I disagree with like the philosophy of God and Christianity and everything, like, or even like Allah. Just I'm talking like human practices that abuse it. But anyways, I digress.
It's almost a miracle soil. It regenerates.
Like abusive practices or whatever.
It's full of biochar. It's been deliberately created.
Like, I'm a spiritual guy.
They put a lot of refuse in it as well, and it just works and multiplies, and it keeps on rejuvenating its own fertility. So patches that are 8,000 years old are still fertile today.
The thing that I keep coming back to is I understand that there is the technology or the trial and error that's happened in order to make the Amazon very useful to humans in a way that other areas on the planet wouldn't have been. Also understand that you can curate the jungle, Brazil nut trees becoming more prevalent, etc. It's still, to me, thinking.
I found it very strange that Joe Rogan also didn't.
Humans built for.
Just like talking mathematically now.
It just seems so.
The pro-abortion voter base is massive.
Why would you decide to?
It's a majority.
I don't know what America was like.
Well, that's
of Americans.
That's where you have to ask yourself, what was the Amazon that we're now looking at? What was it like?
So for Joe Rogan, not just to ask that question,
12,
like,
13,
okay, tell me more.
What's the strategy here? Going against the majority of Americans. It's just too much, man. On that one policy, obviously, but
human beings were. Of course, climate change was involved as well, but I suspect
Joe Rogan, no questioning.
Right from the beginning.
I was pretty upset. I was disappointed.
Extending over.
It's pretty fucking red pilling though, eye opening.
Giant rainforest. The rainforest itself is probably not much older than 14,000 years.
Because how would you have been able to make thousands and thousands of circles inside of squares if every 2 feet, there's another tree.
Exactly. That's right. And certainly, at the very least, you'd have to clear the area that you wanted to build your earthwork in. And so it's just one of those great unexamined
It's like
areas,
he's so easygoing with
where the
him.
human story has not been followed through enough. And when we do follow it through, we find.
Oh yeah, of course.
Great
I mean, you kidding me, bro? Dude, he probably took it so hard from his wife when he got home.
That we would call a quote-unquote advanced.
I mean, I don't know if his wife is like evangelical, but dude, one, they're in fucking Texas,
lots of other ways to be
which could fucking impose abortion bans, or close clinics, or call them criminals.
Spiritual wealth and its ability to live in harmony.
And for him to not
the environment in which
fucking say anything,
our civilization, despite all its tech,
it's insane.
is not living in harmony.
I really don't know if it's like a man thing,
whereas Amazonian civilization,
because I don't think men are not that stupid. Like, dude, it's insane. The woman's gonna be pissed. You're gonna fucking piss off your woman at the most fundamental level of freedom and individuality, and trusting them, listening to them, and respecting their body.
The convenience and the opportunity,
but there's no way.
The availability of all of the things that everybody has in the modern world. I'm not,
sorry, I'm fucking really.
Being,
because I see it, man. I see the party that implemented injection segregation is gonna win the election, and it's driving me insane. And it's just like I'm fucking losing my mind.
No, I don't think individuals.
I don't know what to do because I can't do anything. So I'm just gonna sit here, play video games, like a guy on the internet. Appreciate you being here. I really do.
The fact is, we aren't looking after the world.
But it's like fucking bleak, man.
Detached from it. And yes,
feeling pretty shitty. The future is fucking bleak.
Spiritual value in it. This is one of the problems with modern science, and its desperate desire to separate itself.
The best scenario, like honestly, is if Trump just like has some epiphany and us the viewers. There's only one thing that can change this, like the results. I think is Trump come out and say, "Listen, I sat down, I spoke to my wife.
I think that this is what's missing in our society today.
I had a chat with my family, my daughters. I learned a lot about women and women's rights,
and a connection to the
and
universe. And that's why things happen in the way they do. But it can change.
I would
don't think any of the mainstream
motion to never sign a nationwide fucking approval or whatever.
Profound spiritual experiences within the mainstream religions, but I think what's
and it's strange because like
beginning to seek spiritual directions.
This is pretty much the number one thing in the news
has become so well known
and
in the West, because it does seem to open
out of the voice of the mouth of Kamal. There's no way they're not aware that they might lose the election because of this abortion thing.
I would say so.
So it makes me think they're throwing it,
and also the key difference,
like controlled opposition, like they're told to throw the election. But then why would they fake an assassination attempt on Trump more than war?
Whatever it is, it's not this. You're experiencing.
Yeah.
If our brains are
dude.
Some sort of elaborate novel, then it's astonishing.
It just doesn't make any sense, man. It doesn't make any sense.
But many of us who've worked with ayahuasca and DMT can't rid ourselves of this sense that we're getting briefed.
Ever since that assassination attempt, I think it just they faked assassination attempt. It showed that he has 100% handlers and that he's compromised.
And it's being done at the University of California.
So, yeah, like,
the way to do IV DMT.
and then
that's Imperial College.
Yeah. So
his charges in Florida were dropped a few days after. They threw him a bone.
The peak state that you would be in 5 minutes after you've had the third puff on the pipe, the peak state that you would be in there, they can keep you there for or longer.
Because they wanted him to run.
3.5 million years.
Well,
subjectively.
I've tried to volunteer for this.
How's that?
Are they going? Like
they won't let me because I have epilepsy. But one of the projects that's taking place in America may allow me to volunteer.
I can't
don't
see
believe it
Trump
would have any-
winning.
Brave man in that regard.
I don't believe it would have any negative interaction with my epilepsy because I've had quite a lot of experience of DMT and
This
I've had no
election,
problems.
naturally.
On the contrary, I find it helpful. But I would like to try that extended thing because.
Have you done the pipe?
Oh yeah,
Yep.
I've smoked DMT and I vaped DMT. Both are
Drank it through the.
and then drunk it through the ayahuasca route. The nice thing about going straight to the DMT is you don't have the negative physical consequences, and that you can be in the middle of an extraordinary vision where the revelations are just piling in on you, and suddenly your stomach says no. Get me out of here immediately, and that often involves in the jungle squatting behind it.
But what do I know?
And fighting whatever creatures are living in that tree.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by Function. I partnered with Function because I wanted a smarter and more comprehensive way to understand what's happening inside of my body. Function has been an absolute game changer. They run lab tests twice a year that monitor everything from your heart health and your hormone levels to nutrient deficiency and stuff like thyroid function. They even screen for 50 types of cancer at stage 1, which is 5 times more data than you get in a typical annual physical. Testosterone levels play a massive role in your energy and performance, and being able to see them charted over the course of a year with actionable insights to actually improve them gives you a clear path to making your life better. Lab testing like this would usually cost thousands, but with Function
What?
instantly $500. Function
Come on,
has a
man.
300,000 person waiting list, but every Monday they open a few spots for Modern Wisdom listeners, and you can get your expert blood work analysis and bypass that 300,000 person wait list by heading to the link in the description below or going to functionhealth.com/modernwisdom. That's functionhealth.com/modernwisdom. What did you learn about the Mayans?
Well, this is another extraordinary civilization of the ancient world, which I think has much more ancient origins than are given to it. We have to trace the origins of Mayan civilization.
Yo, Canadian
back to
Agent, what's up, brother?
called the Olmecs. And then we have to look at the incredible sophistication and complication of Mayan mathematics and Mayan astronomy.
What's up, man? How are you?
The
Hope you're good.
numbers that they used and how they were recording dates on stele that go back 30 million years into the past.
Where are they? On a modern map, where do you point to where the Mayans were?
The Yucatan Peninsula, primarily, but then going on into Guatemala.
Oh, no worries, man.
As well. That's the Mayan area.
For sure, brother.
For season 2 of Aged Apocalypse, we filmed
Oh,
specifically.
no
the
freaking way.
Which is down at the bottom of
It's
the
on.
Yucatan, the nearest large
It's
town is
on.
Villahermosa. Palenque
Yeah,
is a
buddy.
magnificent
Oh,
Mayan
snap.
site dating back to the
It has
section
begun. Like
AD.
fucking Shang Tsung.
And, it's got a
It
series of
has
pyramids built around
begun.
a beautiful plaza with what appears to be an astronomical observation tower.
When he's on the boat.
Structure that is probably
in the
wrongly
movie.
referred to as the past. I was able to discuss the site at length with an archaeologist. Not all archaeologists hate me. Quite a number of archaeologists are interested in what I do, are willing to work with me. Don't necessarily agree with me, but are willing at least to have a civil conversation with me. And I was so lucky to have Ed Barnhart as a guest when we were in Palenque.
He seems cool. I watched him on Lexi's show.
He's a brilliant guy, and he's fun, and he's just
Nice,
so
buddy.
fun to be around. And
Hell
just
yeah,
a
brother.
mine of information about the Mayan calendar and about Mayan astronomy and about Mayan mathematics.
Do you read Mayan?
Yeah, definitely add your name to that list on the elite, so your name ends up on the elite website, like the main page
Which it was all about.
when you're
And
streaming.
one of the things we touched on was the fact that
Now they
there's
have an
a very
N64 for sure. They'll add you for
specific
sure.
idea about what happens to the soul after death.
They might ask who you are,
Idea
but
is found all around the world. It's found
I think
very powerfully in
Yoris
South
is
America, Mexico,
Yoris and
Central America,
Alchemass.
North America.
I think they're the ones that run that
But it's also
thread,
found
so
in
I'm sure they
Egypt,
recognize
it's
your
found
name.
in Mesopotamia, and it's found in ancient India. And the idea is that upon death, the soul makes a leap to the heavens. Where it specifically leaps to is the Milky Way. This is referred to in many cultures as the path of souls. And it's the
What
deceased
talks?
individual
What Discord?
soul
The elite
makes
Discord?
a
No
journey
way.
along the path of souls. And there will be confronted with all the errors and mistakes.
Wow.
and also
Which Discord? The Elite?
Like a judgment day.
It's like a judgment.
I ironically
and that
left
judgment
it.
is represented by monstrous beings and locked gates that you have to be able to confront. And this idea is just found all around the world, and it's one of the reasons.
A couple months ago.
One of the reasons that I find
I
very
didn't like how they
persuasive
treated Goose.
that we've lost
Oh.
an episode of the human story. I don't think this is a coincidence. But I think we're looking.
I don't know.
at
I didn't like how they kicked out Goose and Ace, and
which was passed down.
it's just like, are my friends in this Discord right now? I'm like,
reinterpreted and developed by the people it was
I'm
passed.
saying that because it sounds like there's echoes of that in some modern religions, that you don't think they've independently arisen separately, you think that it's a single lineage.
I think it's a single image. Yeah. I think when we come to specific ideas like that, plus the availability and the focus upon the sacred nature of specific numbers in many different cultures around the world. Well,
cool, brother.
There's a phenomenon which has been very important in my work over the last 30 years called the precession of the equinoxes. It's not.
Wow, you're gonna learn
Everybody knows about. So I'll
1.2
it's actually an observable effect.
control
But
style.
it's hardly observable within a human lifetime. If
Will
you,
be a whole new
the
world.
best way to observe it, if you could extend your life by a few hundred years and just be at the same spot every spring equinox when the sun rises perfectly due east, you'd be there before dawn, a good hour before dawn. A constellation of the zodiac is going to be lying on the horizon in the place where the sun rises, and that constellation was seen by ancient cultures.
Wow,
as
insane.
the
Is
hour
it?
of the summer,
Is it?
equinox,
Is it
and defined the direction of the
possible? How?
but if you could be there for several hundred years, you would notice that it's gradually shifting.
How?
And eventually another constellation will slip into place behind
How
the
do you
sun
think?
on that same key day.
And what's happening there from an astronomical
Well, what's
perspective?
happening?
Do
is
you
the
have
Earth is
a
orbiting
do you have a
the
vision
stars, and
of
not
a
only is it
51
rotating on its
run?
own axis, as we know,
What would
it's
have
also
to happen?
And that wobble, one of the most noticeable effects over long periods of time is it changes the pole star. So, because what is the pole star except the star that the extended north pole of the Earth points most directly at? And at the moment it's Polaris, but it's been Thuban, it's been Draco, it's been many other stars in Thuban is in the
Oh, what?
Draco
Come
in
on.
the past. What's the cycle?
How long does it take you to get back?
25,920 years.
I'm glad that you know it.
25,920 years, and the process unfolds at a rate of 1 degree every 72 years. So that
It's
is
going to be tough to track in the space of a 72-year lifetime.
It is. So you need.
Oh, wow,
you need
really?
long-term observation. You need record keeping, and you need the information being passed on from generation to generation. But sooner or later, you're going to notice. If you're an avid watcher of the heavens, if these things matter to you as they did to ancient cultures, you're going to notice that this is shifting along the horizon. Whether you're going to figure out exactly why that observable is happening, that's another matter which I can't give you a definite answer on. But that the observable was observed going back a very long way into the past is clear.
Oh wow, insane.
And I can't touch on this
Interesting, bro.
without paying tribute to
Come on, man,
Giorgio
like what?
Santillano and Hertha von Desch.
That's interesting, dude.
Giorgio was the professor of the history of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology back in the
But how do you
1960s.
know? Where do you get
Well,
the
I think
info?
people
1 in a
know
million
today.
lag
And
states.
Hertha was a professor
Where
of
was
history
that
of science
info
at Frankfurt University.
Obtained from? Is it
And
valid?
They published this astonishing, groundbreaking book called Hamlet's Mill. And Hamlet's Mill is about the ancient recognition of precession. They completely these are leading academic figures. They completely dismiss the notion that the Greeks discovered precession just 2,000 or 2,300 years ago. They're confident that it goes back thousands of years before that, and they trace it back to what they call some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. The fact that this is found all around the world in many, many different cultures. Classic example,
Come on, let's go. No! You fucking son of a bitch.
In the Angkor complex has 54 statues.
Bro,
on
like
that
this
site,
game, man.
and
This
each of
fucking
those is
game.
pulling on
Like, what the fuck
the
was
body of a
that?
serpent. And if you add 54 to 54, you get 108. 108 is 72.
Wow,
That's
insane.
36, half of 72. 72
So
is
what? So like, what is this one? What is this 1 in a million?
precessional imagery.
What? How do you know
What they're doing
why?
on that giant serpent as they're churning the Milky Ocean.
Like, can you validate that claim, 1 in a million?
On Angkor Thom, it's actually in 3 dimensions. They're churning the Milky Ocean, and as a result, they're producing the Amrita, the elixir of immortality. But that churning.
Yes, but my main concern is, like, where does the 1 in a million number come from?
Into this number system all around.
Out of curiosity.
What are some of the other numbers? You mentioned 108.
They're all multiples of 72 or additions to 72.
If you don't know, that's okay, but that's my main
plus 36 being 108
critique
is a processional number.
of
Very
the
widely respected number found in sacred
proposal
all around the world. 43,200 is another processional number. That's 72 times 600. That is a number that's found everywhere. There are 432,000 syllables in the Rig Veda. It's the same number again and again, based on the same system of ideas that keeps on coming up.
What were the numbers that the Mayans were obsessed by?
The Mayans were very much involved in the equinoxes and in precessional numbers.
I have an idea as to how to obtain that number by running simulations at least 1 million times to see if each lag is unique.
5 million.
But I'd like to hear your
and they could tell you
validation of 1 in a million if you have that information.
what the phase of the moon was on a particular day 5 or 10 million years ago.
Why do you think they were so preoccupied with
Interesting.
history, long numbers, numerology?
Well, numerology is a fair word for it, in the sense that numbers are thought to have a sacred or magical quality.
Why do you think that the Mayans? What is it?
Well, I've always seen this as a.
But isn't the TAS on emulator?
For this, as though I'm.
Or is it performed on N64
but I see the Mayan calendar
console?
And the mathematics associated with it as an out-of-place artifact. I see it as something which is, the need for it is hard to explain within
This
the
fucking
general
guy, man.
circumstances of Mayan culture, to have that precise mathematical calculation and this ability to
Not you,
think
I mean
back
that guard.
millions of years into the past and into the future. It's hard to see the need for it. It feels like something that would have been needed in a much bigger culture, a much bigger civilization.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the explanation.
Put huge numbers of specialists to work.
It was more like, if you have the info, that's cool. It was more rhetorical though. But I mean, the game chooses a state. When you turn it on, it constantly changes. Even the menus, even the memorizes tasks.
Then they did their own work on it and developed it, and it's a very extraordinary.
So the permutation of states.
The Mayans inherited it. It was passed down somehow.
It's multiplicative.
Why would they have needed it?
I think that, look at our so-called civilization today. I mean, we have no problem with big numbers. They're quite useful to us. We have no problem with complex, sophisticated mathematics. We are quite capable of peering back millions of years in the past. I mean, our present creation story is that the Earth formed 4,500 million years ago.
Interesting.
4.5 billion years ago. And the evidence seems to suggest that it did. But, that can also be viewed as a creation in a way, a scientific creation. The Big Bang, that's another. It's a theory, it's a speculation, but did it happen? Was it that way? There's evidence suggesting that it was.
But was it done on console, or was it emulator on computer?
Myths about the nature
the
of
TAS
are not limited to hunter-forager peoples in the ancient world. They're also found in the scientific world today.
How much do you think of this focus on astronomy and numbers is from a functional perspective, something logistically, operationally useful, and how much do you think is symbolic and sort of sacred?
I don't think it's primarily functional. Most archaeologists will tell you that. They say, of course,
No worries, dude. You don't have to justify it or teach me the entire thing. You can lurk if you want, brother. But I appreciate the info, big time.
You want to know the season to plant, the season to reap. So you want to be aware of the spring equinox. You want to know the longest day of the year, the shortest day of the year, the solstices. These are useful in an agricultural calendar. That's the argument that's given by archaeologists. But in my opinion, any self-respecting farmer anywhere in the world is really well aware of when he should plant or she should plant and when they should sow. They don't need devices that tell them when the equinox is there. There is such a device in really magical one at Chichen Itza in the Yucatan. And this is on the pyramid of Kukulkan, which is another name for Quetzalcoatl.
So it was done on PC, I understand. I understand I'm trying to understand now the critique of the other eliters, I think. That's where my first question would come from. If it was like done on computer. Just in terms of lag, just overall lag, just everything. Total.
This magical effect occurs, and the shadows of the corner of the pyramid are cast on the balustrade of that stairway, and they create the shadow form of a serpent, of an undulating serpent, which joins with that.
It is interesting, though. It is very interesting.
Happens on the equinox, and not at any other time. So they pinpoint.
It'd be interesting to see when it shoots. Is there a video? I guess there's a video. There must be a video of it. It'd be interesting to see like where it shoots, when it shoots, because there are lag spikes in Damn Agent for sure. I would like to see if they correlate with where I think they are.
This memory of the feathered serpent, of Kukulkan, of Quetzalcoatl.
I'm going to say, so let's just linger on that for a second, because, I've heard you on Joe's show talking about this for a long time. And I always think about, that's magical. Like, it sounds to me...
I'm pretty sure Carl Jobs shot a couple bullets on his 52 at the drums. Might be wrong, though. I think he did, though. Before the gate.
Archaeology and architecture, all of this together. But can you just think for a second about what the psychology of those humans was like?
No, man. People are fucking sensitive.
As above, so below.
People are defensive, man.
There was an ancient.
They're sensitive. Like, who cares? Who cares if you're wrong, or who cares if you're right? Who knows? Let's see. I mean, you're probably it sounds like you're technically right, but on the only thing is, I would say you're not. I wouldn't say it's right, because the uncertainty is emulator versus console, right? Computer versus N64 hardware console. So I can't say it's right, but I mean, who cares if you're wrong about something? Like, you don't have to fucking make fun, like.
That if we fall out of harmony with the heavens, if we disconnect,
people take it like personally, defensively,
and we must constantly maintain and reinforce and
it's like, who cares?
And respect our connection to the wider universe. That's what As Above, So Below is about. That's why I
think we can learn a lot from that task.
Discoverer of the Orion correlation.
It might help me get 52.
Reject completely the
no, dude. Beware of the elite community.
Replicate the 3 stars of the belt of the constellation of Orion in the sky, but that they don't do so precisely in 2500 BC when the pyramids are supposed to have been built. The perfect match is in 10,500
because of wobble.
Because of the precessional wobble, exactly. That's right. They're building precession, and they're using precession. They're using the language of astronomy and massive architecture to memorialize a particular date. Does that mean that the whole Giza complex was built 12,500 years ago? No, but it does mean that it's memorializing a date that's 12,500. Just like any Western cathedral may be memorializing events that took place in the time of Abraham. It doesn't mean that they were built at the time of Abraham. But I do think the Great Sphinx does date back 12,500 years. I think we're looking at a complex that's been.
Well, it's not that you're wrong. It's just we don't know.
Increasingly refined.
We don't know if you're wrong.
Very, very long period.
Because it was done on emulator.
In Egypt.
It wasn't done on console, so we don't know. No one knows.
And Giza is one of them. I would suggest that it was the ancient prime meridian, just as the prime meridian in our time, for just reasons of the British Empire, passes through Greenwich. I think in ancient times it passed through Giza. Now, other benefits of the Giza Plateau.
That's interesting because there is lag is massive in this game, and there's different ways to reduce it.
And 30 degrees north latitude is 1/3 of the way.
To be ignorant to that?
So it's not a random.
It's interesting. I think it's very interesting.
If you go into the broad expanse of Giza,
like, is it causal? Are these lag states causal? Are they predictive?
Dead center of the largest area of exposed land.
Right.
So it's interesting for that respect, and then you build upon it
yeah, buddy.
an enormous pyramid weighing 6 million tons with precise orientation.
But I mean, bro, it's like, you know, it's the internet, you know. Like, it's at the end of the day,
that is saying
it's the internet.
Whatever this thing is, it is speaking to the earth. The earth's.
So it's like, what are you?
Its focus.
Like, what were you really
it's locked in to the cardinal directions of our planet? And then we find, and again, of course,
expecting to find.
And archaeologists scoff at this. They will accept that it's the case. Even Flint Dibble, who I debated with in the Joe Rogan Experience in April 2024, even he accepted this, but he mocked it and thought that it was just a coincidence. But it is a fact that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by, guess what, 43,200, it's one of those precessional numbers. It's not a random number.
Well, I mean, it is interesting, right? Like, I used, like, look up. Callie got fucking 52 with, what, 2 boosts, and the lookup. Maybe the lookup is not a meme, right? It seems like it's not. And I use lookup for my 53. So, like, lag reduction. And Carl shot bullets at the tanks.
Here we have a monument,
if I remember that right. It's really interesting. We'll find a way to determine which legs you're on, yeah. And, like, you know, maybe what if Callie, you know, looks up at... I don't know, there's a lot of looking. I'm not an expert at damn agent.
A wish and a desire to lock humanity into the cosmos.
Yeah, find a way to determine which leg state we're on. Yeah.
We're part of something much larger.
Is it causal?
Staying hydrated can be boring, but it doesn't need to be. The problem is that most hydration beverages are filled with sugar and loads of ingredients that you can't pronounce, which is why I'm such a massive fan of Element. It contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients or any other BS. Drinking Element every single morning is how I've started my day for over 3 years now. The reason that I keep talking about Element is that it makes a massive difference to the way that I feel, to my energy levels. It helps me to regulate my appetite, it curbs cravings, and it improves my brain function. And there is a no BS, no questions asked refund policy. So if you're not sure, if you're thinking, God, Chris won't shut up about this, I might give it a try.
Oh, let's go. No, it's not fast enough. And it was terrible pause. I got excited because of the boost, but it's not fast enough.
You can get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box by going to the link in the show notes below or heading to
And like the pause was wrong.
/modern wisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modern wisdom. I was in South Florida about a month ago recording some episodes, and there was this spectacular lightning storm going on, pitch black at night. We were driving back from dinner. South Florida obviously recently had some pretty intense weather, but being British, it's just grey. You know, I'm used to fierce grey, a very mild sort of damp climate, and just driving back, it's one of those storms where the moon is full and is rising, and these lightning storms, and it's off over on the coast on the ocean. And I remember thinking, imagine you were prehistoric human individual looking out.
I had it in 2.4. I'm a fucking idiot.
That you had done.
I didn't get any boost, though. It wasn't going to be it. It wasn't going to be fast enough anyways. But I'm fucking retarded. That's what I am.
Whatever it is that you know.
I'm not retarded, but that was really dumb. It wasn't going to be fast enough, though. I needed miracle boosts.
Stories and narratives, because that's the way that, you know, without stats and books, that's the way that you pass down information. I just remember thinking, like, all of your relationship as a human, prehistoric human, to everything is done through that kind of a story. That is a god or goddess having a war. It looked like a battle. It looked like, you know, two gods off in the distance throwing lightning at each other. And then most recently, with the hurricanes that have come through Florida, that's, I think, about a 1 in 1,000-year event in terms of the rainfall and some of the speed of the winds. So it's rare but not unheard of, and maybe 10 times since perhaps the Americas were settled, something like that would have happened.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what a tribe that saw that occur would think?
Yeah, but supposing they saw something even much bigger than that. Supposing they saw something that affected the whole world, their whole world, however far they could go. It was devastated, it was destroyed. They themselves might have been destroyed by it. Can you imagine how that would be recorded? And could that be why we have 200 myths of a global flood that destroyed a prehistoric civilization found all around the world? A global cataclysm. These myths mix up a number of different effects. They mix up bolts of fire from the sky. They mix up volcanoes suddenly erupting. They include earthquakes, and they include flood, global flood, a flood that floods everything, that is capable of submerging lands. And this is why I'm very interested in the epoch called the Younger Dryas, which unfolded between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. It's why we call our series Ancient Apocalypse.
I was going to say, what's the apocalypse bit?
Well, the apocalypse bit is that the Younger Dryas, that's a name given by climatologists to an episode of really weird climate that took place at the end of the last ice age. They call it the Younger Dryas after a species of alpine flower that flourishes in extremely cold weather. What happened, to cut a long story short, is that down to about 12,800 years ago, give or take a century, because you can't be that precise with these definitions, the Earth was definitely emerging from the Ice Age. It was getting warm, and things were looking good. It felt like that 100,000 years of frozen world was coming to an end.
Cool, bro. I'm glad you're going to be joining the N64 madness.
You have sudden sea level rise. You have a plunge in global temperature, so that suddenly, almost overnight, it is as cold as it was as the absolute peak of the last ice age. This happens suddenly, and it happens right around the world. Worse, of course.
It's a very diverse group.
And much less vicious in its effects in tropical and equatorial zones, but a massive event. This is the time, precisely that window, when all the big megafauna of the Ice Age go extinct. Saber-toothed tigers, mastodons, mammoths. When we were at White Sands, by the way, it was just amazing to see these mammoths.
I can't believe I missed that headshot.
They're big.
They're very big.
Thought for sure I hit it.
Have you been following the work of Ben Lamb at Colossal? Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so they are bringing back woolly mammoths.
I've seen that, yes.
Yeah, so Ben was on the show, and maybe talking about actually being involved with the project a little bit. Just to tangent off before you tell us more about Younger Dryas, the reason, one of the reasons that they're looking at bringing them back, that they think that by putting them in the higher latitudes, these animals will be able to compact down the snow and reflect back more sun. So they'll be able to use extinct species to help combat modern global warming.
It's a very fancy idea.
It's amazing. I mean, they're farmers, they're farm animals in a way that they will eat seeds from here and poop them over there, which will help to spread things around. So the other two, I asked him what else are we working on. So he's got this, the way they're doing it, it's the Asian elephant. So they've taken all of these frozen samples of genetic material. They're then using AI to splice in the gaps. So there will be, at some point, there will be an Asian elephant that gives birth to a woolly mammoth when they're ready.
Oh, we missed by like a fucking millimeter.
But the other one, and this is so cool, I really love this idea from Ben. He said that, I was like, what else do you want to bring back? Like, saber-toothed tiger, that's pretty cool. And he said, dodo bird. I mean, it's a meme. Why would you bring back it's useless? Precisely. Why would you do that? And he said, well, it was because it was the reason that it was dead was because of environmental destruction. So he's using all of the effort, being very public about the effort that they have to go to in order to bring this bird back, to say, see how much we had to do, see the labor that we had to jump through in order to be able to bring back this thing that we could have just avoided destroying its habitat in the first place. So it's like a PR bird. So it may end up being actually way more useful than you ever thought, but kind of only as a public relations tool. But I thought that was really cool.
It is very cool.
Colossal's awesome. People should go and check them out.
It would be nice to see how it all ends up. It's a real thing. It's going to happen.
It's happening. I mean, the Asian elephant thing, they're ready to pull the pin on it. I think it'll happen within the next few years.
Fascinating.
Awesome. So younger dryas.
Yeah. So the younger dryas, within almost the living memory of the human species, we know that there have been huge cataclysms on the Earth before. The best known example is the Chicxulub crater in deeply buried off the Gulf of Mexico, the so-called KT dinosaur. They were dinosaurs extinct 65 or 66 million years ago. There have been a number of events like that caused by cosmic impacts from objects from.
I'm sure that you've looked at this as well, but I really loved learning about the fact that asteroid had it have hit in a slightly different area of the Earth. It wasn't to do with even the impact, it was to do with the toxic dust that was kicked up from some particular type of rock that's very deep down underneath there. And you're talking about seconds later. That the entire future of the Earth, maybe 10 seconds later.
Because these things are traveling at tens of thousands of miles.
We're spinning pretty quick as well. And it would have been it was about as bad of a place for the dinosaurs, pretty good for us, that it could have hit. And I always think about that when we think about contingency and convergence and thin chance.
Interesting. Maybe the dinosaurs annoyed the universe.
Perhaps they weren't tracking their precession sufficiently well. They didn't know their wobble. Anyway, sorry, younger dryas. I keep distracting.
It's not a distraction. It's relevant. The point is that there have been a number of extinction level events on our planet, and what is not being properly taken into account is that although it was very recent in geological terms, just 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas was also an extinction level event. And it led to the extinction, as I said, of all the great megafauna of the Ice Age, and it ushered in the Holocene, the modern age that we live in today. The team who are working on what is called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis deserve to be taken seriously. Their opponents in science try to paint them as some sort of lunatic fringe, but actually we're dealing with a number, more than 60, highly credentialed scientists who are just following the evidence where it leads them. And what the evidence leads them to, and I've given all the data on this in my books, particularly in Magicians of the Gods, that was published in 2015, what the evidence leads to is the conclusion that the Earth, 12,800 years ago, passed through the debris stream of a disintegrating comet. All comets disintegrate sooner or later. For those who would wish to see an example of this, it's Jupiter. It's the Shoemaker-Levy 9 hitting Jupiter and breaking up into 21 fragments before it did so. Comets break up into multiple fragments. Every single meteor shower that we see, and we pass through dozens of them a year, every single one of those is the debris stream of a disintegrated comet. That's what they all are. Every single shooting star is a bit of a comet that we're looking at.
Golf ball.
Sometimes
bigger.
Sometimes those bits are really large. Sometimes they can be kilometers in diameter. And what is called the Taurid meteor stream, because it appears to emanate in our time from the constellation of Taurus. Of course, it's not coming from the constellation of Taurus. It's a visual effect. That bit of the sky that the constellation of Taurus is in. The Taurid meteor stream is full of large and dangerous objects. And it's also full of smaller objects. When I say smaller, they might be 100 or 200 meters in diameter instead of 2 or 3 kilometers in diameter. The view of the Comet Research Group who are behind the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is that 12,800 years ago, the Earth entered a swarm of cometary debris. That swarm did include some large objects. And they reckon that's why the North American ice cap went into a sudden meltdown 12,800 years ago, unleashing floods on an enormous scale and raising sea levels, very oddly at a time when global temperatures were sinking. Normally, you get sea level rise when global temperatures are rising, but they plunged during the ever droughts, and yet you have sea level rise. So they think that some large objects hit the North American ice cap and some hit the Northern European.
Multiple, not single large impact.
No. But they do think that there were some large objects that hit the ice caps. But they think primarily what it was airbursts of objects that were about 100 up to 200 meters in diameter. Airbursts like the Tunguska event in 1908, June the 30th, 1908. Nobody disputes that was a bit of a comet. It almost certainly was a comet that fell out of the Taurid meteor stream, because that is the peak of what's called the Beta Taurids in precisely 13th of June. It didn't leave any crater because it blew up in the sky. The Earth's atmosphere destroyed it in the sky, but that airburst flattened, the rough calculation is 2,000 square miles of Siberian forest. And when investigators went into the area a few years later, they just found the whole forest flattened over an enormous area by this airburst. It was a cataclysmic airburst. Now, if you take that, fortunately, it was an uninhabited area of Siberia. But if you take that over population areas and you multiply it by 100, it's not just one airburst, it's 100 airbursts. And as you say, the Earth is spinning pretty fast. It's rotating at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. So you can see how the trajectory of these bits coming in will actually spatter the Earth across a huge range of the Earth's circumference. And the evidence from
I can't believe I missed that camera, dude.
That these airbursts were taking place from as far west as the west coast of North America and as far east as Syria, as far south as Antarctica and southern Chile, as far north as Belgium. So this was a very large event, and the fact that no massive craters have been found yet is partly explained by the sense that the larger objects hit the North American ice cap, and partly explained by the fact that airbursts don't leave craters, but they do decimate communities, like Abu Huraira in Syria, which is within 150 miles of the extraordinary site of Göbekli Tepe, and which was wiped out 12,800 years ago. Abu Huraira was completely flattened by something.
I mean, by flattened?
I mean that everybody there was killed, and that the whole place was destroyed. It was rapidly reoccupied. Within 2 or 3 years, it was reoccupied and repopulated, but something really bad happened there. And the traces on the ground, the iridium, the nanodiamonds, the shocked quartz, the melt glass like trinitite, all of these things speak to precisely what the Comet Research Group thinks went happen, that this was an airburst of an object of roughly Tunguska size that happened to happen over an ancient settlement.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by Nomadic. Traveling should be about the journey, not the chaos of packing. That is why I'm such a massive fan of Nomadic. They make the best backpacks and luggage in the world. The difference in the quality of your life when you have a proper, well-designed backpack is immeasurable. They've got compartments for everything, your laptop, your shoes, your sunglasses. It's so well organized that even your toothbrush will feel important. It is literally like the Marie Kondo of luggage. Everything has its place, which makes traveling more enjoyable, makes you less late, makes you more organized. Best of all, their products will literally last you a lifetime with their lifetime guarantee. So this is the last backpack that you ever need to buy. And you can return or exchange any product within 30 days for any reason, so you can buy it completely risk-free. You can get a 20% discount off your first purchase when you go to the link in the show notes below.
20%. How expensive is this backpack? Nomadic.com.
Get yourself a new backpack that will change your life.
With modern wisdom. Nomadic.
MW20 at checkout. If you throw a couple of 200 meter sized airburst comets.
I need a better backpack. My backpack is fucking breaks my back.
Lots of fire, lots of what?
Well, what happens, first of all, and this is a key part of why did the temperature fall? And the answer to that is that's why the view is that some large objects hit the North American ice cap and the European ice cap.
$400? Come on, man. Come on, man.
Well, you can start. You can start at
$400.
You can come down into Montana, and you still have ice cap, and it's a mile deep.
For a backpack, $400 fucking dollars.
Object hitting that is not going to leave a crater into the ground. The crater is going to be in the ice.
$424.
Meltwater is going to be released from the ice into the world ocean. It's going to flood off the land and into the ocean, both the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. And that's
like, what the fuck, man?
What brought the climate down.
And it's ugly as fuck, too. It's really ugly.
Pouring into the world ocean
Show you.
and stopping
it's
the
hideously ugly.
in its tracks.
Look like a fucking Ninja Turtle.
In its tracks today, global warming would not be a problem any longer. We'd be in global.
Oh, are you okay, Toad? Bro, hope you're okay, man. $400. It's like a fucking Ninja Turtle.
For the sudden plunge in climate.
400. I was like 20% off. How much can this, like, is this actually? Oh, it's a 14 liter. How much is a 14? $400. Just fuck you.
Meridional overturning circulation of which the Gulf Stream is a part, and led to this sudden cooling. But they don't ask themselves
$400. Come on, man.
Get into the world ocean in the first place.
Dude.
That is what the Younger Dryas
backpack
explains.
What's the alternative hypothesis for how the Gulf
Stream you're hungry as fuck? Oh, man.
Well, there is no real
Dude, take care of yourself, man. Listen to your body.
There is a hypothesis.
Take care of yourself, man.
I just don't think it's a very good one. They say that what happened was that glacial lakes formed in North America. Glacial Lake Missouri and Glacial Lake Agassiz. And these lakes were bounded
What's up,
by
Toad?
ice dams. And that from
20-day
time to
water
time,
fast? Wow.
the pressure of water on the dam would break it and the water in the lake would flood out. And they tried to account for this with sort of
I bet.
80 flooding events over a period of a couple of thousand years or more. Whereas what the evidence on the ground speaks to one major flooding event. And that sudden drop in climate is very definitely keyed into the date of around 12,800 years ago.
Talk to me about Easter Island.
What a place. I love Easter Island. It's
a Toad.
And mysterious and remote. 2,000 miles from the coast of Peru, 2,000 miles from Tahiti, literally in the middle of nowhere. There sits Easter Island. And we know that it has been inhabited by human beings, but the general view of archaeology is not for very long. The general view sees Easter Island as being settled perhaps as recently as 1,000 years ago. But maybe you could go back to 700 AD, 1,300, 1,400 years ago. There's some dispute about this, but the notion that Easter Island might have been settled...
$400 for a backpack. Like, I'm upset.
Is not widely accepted. And so it's the settlement of Easter Island is seen as something that happened towards the end of what is referred to as the Polynesian expansion. And let us recognize the incredible achievements of the Polynesians, who were the world's ultimate seafarers. I mean, they explored the whole Pacific Ocean, and they found Easter Island, a tiny, tiny dot in the middle of nowhere. And there's no doubt that the indigenous inhabitants of Easter Island today are descended from Polynesians. They are Polynesian people, no doubt about that whatsoever. But the question is there a prehistory to Easter Island that is being missed? And I feel very strongly there is. And there are signs already that possibility of a much older prehistory to Easter Island is beginning to be explored. One of our indigenous guests on the show happens to be an archaeologist from Easter Island, and her name is Sonia Ho. And she and her team have found remnants of what are called banana phytoliths, these tiny little bits, microscopic bits of banana, in an excavation that they did in a place called the Raro-Kau crater. And they're datable. And they date back not to the Ice Age, but they date back 3,000 years, which is at least twice as old as human beings were ever supposed to have been on Easter Island. And why I say human beings is because you can't transfer bananas from place to place any other way than human beings bringing them there. Those bananas could not have been
been blown by the wind.
No, they are a result of human activity. So the presence of it's quite a dynamite finding. It doesn't take Easter Island back to the Ice Age, but it does suggest that there's a lot more that we need to find in Easter Island. And I'm just intrigued by the traditions of the Easter Islanders, by the fact that they have a memory of a flooded homeland which was destroyed in a global cataclysm. That homeland was called Hiva, and it was somewhere in the Pacific, and it was flooded in an enormous flood, and some of the survivors found their way to Easter Island. That's how the story is told, but during the period of the Polynesian expansion, there was no flooded island of large size in the Pacific Ocean. Sea levels had already stopped rising by that point. You have to go back to the end of the Ice Age to get that kind of sea level rise that would actually submerge a whole island-sized landmass. And these memories are very clear, still preserved by the Easter Islanders, they don't put a date on it, but it doesn't fit in with the conventional archaeological notion of how or when Easter Island was first settled. There's this suggestion that there's a mysterious lost history in Easter Island, and I'm of the view, and I present evidence for this in the series, that the iconic objects for which Easter Island is best known, the moai, these huge sculptured figures, are definitely not from the last 700 or 800 years. They're much older.
Oh my God!
Is there a way to date them?
Well, largely because of the sedimentation that covers many of them up. They're covered. It was first realized when Thor Heyerdahl did an excavation there back in the 1980s. What you see when you go up onto Ranararaku, there's a number of craters on Easter Island. Ranakau was where they found the banana fighting myths. Ranararaku was one of the main quarries out of which the moai were cut. And what you see when you go up there today is basically head and shoulders sticking out the ground. But if you excavate those objects, those huge statues, you find they really are huge, and that they go down, and Thor Heyerdahl did this, they go down 30 feet under the ground. And they weren't deliberately buried there. They were covered by sedimentation. And so it becomes a calculation of how long.
How much sediment would
you get 30 feet of sedimentation in a tiny island like Easter Island with no other landmass within 2,000 miles to contribute to wind-blown dust and so on and so forth. It all has to come from Easter Island itself. So that's a suggestion that they may be much older. And again, Professor Robert Schock at Boston University, who's done the absolute breakthrough, courageous work on the Great Sphinx and arguing that the Great Sphinx of Giza shows geological evidence of being more than 12,000 years old. Schock is also of the view that the moai of Easter Island are vastly older than we've been told by archaeologists, and he bases that largely on the sedimentation.
Why did they make all of those statues?
Well, the explanation that we were given by an elder on Easter Island, Leo Pukarati, is that they contain magic, they contain mana, they contain a force, they contain power, which can affect crops and which can make all right between humanity and the universe. And that they remember them today as images of ancestors who were of particular importance.
There's different sized ears and stuff that didn't...
Yeah, there's the long ears and the short ears. And that's true.
The two original races. Yeah. Long ears and the short ears.
The long ears and the short ears, yeah. There's a notion that they're imbued with the power of powerful deceased individuals, and that they act as protectors for Easter Island. And there's one particular array in particular of moai, where you have 7 of the moai in a row, and that is thought to memorialize the 7 wise men who fled to Easter Island from the destruction by flood of the land of Hiva.
Oh, how did I miss him?
That seems like a big leap. Why are they the 7 men? Why is there 7? Why did they...
Well, that's a big leap all around the world because there were 7 sages that brought civilization to Mesopotamia as well. According to their myths and traditions, there were 7 sages who brought civilization to Egypt in Zep-Tepi the first time, according to the Edfu texts. This notion of 7 survivors of the cataclysm is pretty widespread.
What about the similarities with other statues around the world?
Yeah, I've been quite struck by that, and I think I was lucky enough to know Thor Heyerdahl. He was an incredibly brilliant, open-minded guy, And I think if Thor he passed away in 2002, but I think if he'd had the opportunity to see Göbekli Tepe and to see the upright T-shaped megaliths there, and to see the fact that they have carved into them arms and hands, and that the hands cross across the belly like this, it's exactly the same posture as the Easter Island statues, except in the case of Göbekli Tepe, particularly in enclosure D where the largest megaliths are, we know that they're close to 12,000 years old. They're 11,600 years old at least. And that precise dating cannot be put on the Easter Island statues, at least not yet, partly because nobody has looked. But there are extraordinary similarities.
Has no one done it? I don't know what you do. Carbon dating? Can you do that with this type of volcanic rock? That these?
Well, you can't carbon date any kind of rock. And has the rock? If the other, there's a thing called luminescence dating, where if a rocky object has been kept away from the light, if you can be sure that it's not seen light for thousands and thousands of years, then you can say when it was last exposed to the light.
No way.
Yeah, you can. There's some kind of radiation comes off it and allows you to say when it was last exposed to light. It doesn't necessarily tell you when it was made, but it tells you when it was last exposed to light.
When it was brought into the cave or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's a great technology. And then the other one is carbon dating.
No.
Carbon dating only works on organic materials. So
unless something's got lodged in it and the likelihood of that not being degraded.
Exactly. That's by and large how most dating is done by archaeologists. When archaeologists are confronted by a megalithic site, they will look for bits of datable material.
Believe there's something organic.
Yeah, which ideally should be trapped underneath a megalith. It should, in order to say
the gold standard, this was here before the thing was here.
Yeah, or to come to the conclusion that the megalith and that object have something in common in terms of their age. That's the closest.
It's a bit of something that's trapped underneath.
Yes, it's an assumption, rather than necessarily an exact dating, but it does give you a guideline, and it's pretty good.
Talking about the Americas, I noticed we haven't touched at all.
I just want to say one thing about Malta, which was in season 1.
Okay.
Because it's in the first season of Ancient Apocalypse. And it concerns this because there's been very tiny amount of carbon dating in Malta.
Oh my god, I suck.
Malta is a massive, extraordinary megalithic culture. Gigantic megalithic temples. And until the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, a temple called Gigantea on the island of Gozo, which is one of the 2 Maltese islands, was thought to be the oldest megalithic site in the world. And it was thought to be about 6,000.
Not eating? Am I right?
And this is based on largely what they call contextual dating, not on carbon dating. But they like to say there is some carbon dating that proves that Gigantea is close to 6,000 years old because carbon dating was done 2 or 3 years ago in a project called Fraxus. But when you look at actually what they carbon dated, they didn't carbon date anything under the temple, which is a protected site. They carbon dated something that was underneath a former toilet block, 40 meters away from the temple. And therefore the conclusion that dates the temple. Even if it were under a megalith, you have to take it carefully as to how and when it got there. But if it's 40 meters away from the temple, I'm sorry, there's no use for dating the temple itself. I think it's possible that the Maltese temples may be, in some cases, as old as Göbekli Tepe. They have comparisons in common, and this dating is at the heart of the matter because there's been very little reliable dating on Malta.
Getting back over to America.
Yeah.
Why haven't we talked about North America yet? We've been talking about
Brazil.
We've been
talking about
yeah, I know what you mean.
Because we have filmed in North America.
It looks pretty bad.
We had an extraordinary period of filming in Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon is the most incredible.
Or what about eel pie? Let's just talk about gross stuff. So, Toad loses his appetite.
Chaco Canyon is a massive, beautifully astronomically aligned complex of
How did you get the fucking...
and semi-subterranean circular structures, which again are astonishingly similar to the structures at Göbekli Tepe, and which even have that T-shape that is very common in Göbekli Tepe. But the thing about Chaco Canyon, the biggest great house there, has got more than 400 rooms in it. And many of those rooms are completely sealed off. And archaeologists have found there's no evidence that any large population ever lived there. This place was clearly built for
What is this, the eel pie? Oh no, I'm scared.
People made pilgrimages to Chaco Canyon.
Come on, man.
That's how they got there.
That's not real life.
And the place was,
come on, man.
Used as a site
That's a fish. Those are fish.
As above, so below.
Those are fish heads.
Into the summer solstice, sunset and sunrise, the winter solstice,
it's not eel, is it?
Different buildings, the equinoxes. They're all tied up. There are alignments that extend over distances of tens of kilometers to other structures, perfectly in line with the solstitial alignment. This was the work of an amazing astronomical culture. No, I'm not claiming that astronomical culture was 12,000 years old. But what I'm suggesting is that ideas that it expresses may be much older than the structures themselves. So we
collected from the River Thames.
And we filmed at White Sands in New Mexico, where an indigenous expert, Kim Charlie, who was actually one of the people who found the footprints in the first place, was my principal informant, and it was wonderful to see the emotion that she felt about the connection of her people with these 23,000-year-old footprints. Would we have filmed elsewhere in America? Yes, but unfortunately archaeologists prevented us from doing so.
Tell me more about that.
Well, just as they denied us access to film at Serpent Mound in Ohio in the first season of Ancient Apocalypse, we'd made an episode about Serpent Mound anyway. We were able to do some filming from neighboring land, but we were specifically denied access in a written document that I have put online, which said that the reason that they were denying us access was because I was presenting the series. And basically, they don't agree with my ideas, therefore the best way to censor me is not to allow me to go to Serpent Mound at all, or at least to make it as difficult as possible for me to tell a story about Serpent Mound, a story that would have honoured Serpent Mound and does honour Serpent Mound. Anybody who looks at that episode in Season 1 of Ancient Apocalypse will realise that. Where are we heretical? We're suggesting that the Serpent Mound's alignment to the summer solstice sunset is just slightly off. And the reason that it's slightly off isn't precession, it's another motion of the Earth, which is called the obliquity of the ecliptic. The Earth has a tilt on its axis, and that tilt shifts around 23.5 degrees, and that affects the rising position of the sun on the solstices and the setting position. And what it's targeted at is the setting position of the sun, not today, not 1,000 years ago, but 11,500 years ago. Anyway, we were stopped filming there, and that repeated in Season 2. We wanted to film at Cahokia, an amazing, massive pyramid site. We wanted to film... It's in Illinois. We wanted to... Let me double check that. I'm forgetting which state it's in. I do believe it's Illinois. We wanted to film at... I've been to Cahokia. It is an incredible place, but we were not allowed to film there. Filming permission was denied, again, because I'm the presenter of the series. I wanted to film at Monk's Mound in Alabama, Moundville in Alabama. We sought permission to film there. Same reason, it was denied. So if other majestic, wonderful mound sites in North America don't show up in our series, it's because archaeology didn't want us to film them.
Well, the SAA asked Netflix to recategorize your last series, so I imagine they must be thrilled that you released another one.
Well, the SAA made a desperate, frantic, hysterical effort to have me cancelled. That's basically what it was about. They tried to, I think it's an abuse of power. They tried to use their power as a body representing 5,000 archaeologists to mount a smear campaign against Ancient Apocalypse, to say all sorts of things about it that were simply untrue, to present that in an open letter to Netflix, and to ask that Netflix reframe the series as science fiction instead of documentary. And of course, what a clever way to get someone cancelled. I mean, who's going to watch it if it's science fiction? You know, rightly and properly, it is a documentary series, and it is full of expert opinion from many, many different people. It's not a work of fiction. It's not some kind of novel. This is a documentary. But they wanted it to be called science fiction because they knew that way the viewership would be reduced.
But there's no...
And Netflix, fortunately, ignored them.
There's no real tension or stakes if it's just a whimsical story. The only reason that it actually drives people and is compelling, one of the reasons that it is more so is that this is being proposed as a potential real world story,
Yeah.
not as something that's just been fabricated.
No, absolutely.
What's your
And to the annoyance of archaeology, I think actually there are a number of archaeologists in the SAA. One called John Hoops, who's professor at the University of Kansas, was actually directly involved in the writing of that SAA open letter. And another, of course, is Flint Dibble, who I debated with on the jury. I think they have media aspirations themselves. When I look at the reaction of a lot of these individuals, what I see fundamentally is jealousy and envy. They see that I'm getting exposure in front of a mass public, and they think it should be theirs. So, in fact, I'll say something about John Hoops and Flint Dibble in this context, which is that if individuals who define themselves as archaeologists find themselves spending more and more of their lives just attacking the work of other people, well, what archaeology are they doing? What uses? What have they contributed to human knowledge? When I look at Flint Dibble and I look at John Hoops, the answer I come to is virtually zero. They've contributed nothing to human knowledge. They're not going to make a mark on history. Nothing in the work that they've done is going to have any effect or any significance a generation or two from now. But they can.
Oh wow, it's ripping into Flint Dibble.
Especially if they frame those ideas as assaults upon archaeology.
What's your reflection on the debate that you had with Flint?
Well, I've finally got round to analysing that debate. I've been very busy, as you can imagine, with making season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, which went on, finalisation of that series went on long after the debate in April, and I've not had time, but I did finally sit down to fact-check Flint Dibble, and I've just put that video online quite recently as we were talking just a couple of days ago. What I've done is I've just compared the statements that Flint makes in the debate with the facts. I'm hardly injecting my own words into it at all. It's just important, I think, for people to understand the tactics that were used in that debate. I do think that Flint is a better debater than me, and I say that in the video.
Come on, man.
I do think he was better prepared than me. But some of the tactics that he used, I'm not going to define them here. I would prefer that people look at the video. So the video can be found on my YouTube channel. And I'm going to follow that up ultimately with the only talk that I'm going to give in North America next year. Because next year is looking to be very busy. But I'm going to give a talk on the 19th and 20th of April in Sedona. 2 days of talks. I'm going to present a whole series of arguments called The Fight for the Past. And the link for that is up on the events page of my website. And I hope people will join me there. And I hope people who are critical of my ideas will join me there, because I want to open up to audience discussion in this. But I think my feeling was, I felt quite beaten down after the debate. I felt that I'd done badly. I felt that I'd let my side down, my side being the alternative approach to archaeology. But as time has gone by, and as I've looked at the tactics that Flint used in that debate, and as more and more people have become aware of those tactics, I've realized that in a way it was a good thing that I wasn't the outright winner of that debate, because what it did was it showed to a wide general public the true face of archaeology, which is the skull behind the smile of archaeology, which is an archaeology that seeks to crush and destroy other people, to ridicule and diminish their life's work, to insult them, to humiliate them. That's what comes across in the debate that I had with Flint Dibble. And unfortunately, his kind of archaeologist is most vocal in the issue of attacking alternative views of the past. I think it's very good that the public got to see an archaeologist doing that over a period of several hours. In a debate. I'm actually glad that I didn't do better than I did, but I'm also glad now that I've had time to put the record straight with this video.
How has it been personally to spend such a long time being criticized so heavily from so many people?
Yeah, it goes back a fairly long way. My first book about a historical mystery was called The Sign and the Seal, A Quest for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. Based on my years of experience in Ethiopia, and looks at Ethiopia's claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant. I'd written many books before that, but they were entirely on current affairs issues. The Sign and the Seal was the first book I wrote about a historical mystery. None of my books about current affairs issues received much criticism. The Sign and the Seal didn't either. It was quite welcomed as an interesting story. Good Lord, could the Ark of the Covenant actually be in Ethiopia?
What is the Ark of the Covenant?
As the Ethiopians claim. Well, you've obviously not seen Raiders of the Lost Ark then. It's the Indiana Jones movie. It's the object that's described in the Book of Exodus, carried on carrying poles, made of gold, wood and gold, with the tablets of the Ten Commandments supposedly inside. I won't go into the long details of why it might be in Ethiopia, but my point is that book only got to number 6 on the bestseller list. And that seemed to be just a little bit below the horizon where archaeologists needed to attack it. But the next book, Fingerprints of the Gods, got to number 1 on the bestseller list, not only in the UK, but also in 6 other countries, including Italy and Japan. It became a worldwide phenomenon, and that attracted the eye of Sauron from archaeologists who, even then in 1995, were very annoyed that the public were listening to me. And that's when I started to be directly targeted and attacked by archaeologists and by non-archaeologists who support the archaeological mainstream position. And those attacks grew increasingly furious and unpleasant during the 1990s. And I naturally began to feel quite annoyed about them myself, and I began to feel that I needed to defend myself against these kind of things. I couldn't just let it happen. So I can say that really I've been locked in a kind of argument with archaeology since the mid-1990s. From time to time they've got a big TV program to attack me, like BBC Horizon did a big so-called expose on my work in around the year 2000. There were some serious errors in the Horizon presentation, and it's the first time ever that BBC Horizon has been forced to re-edit and reissue a program. But those errors were there because the archaeologists behind it wanted me and my colleagues like Robert Boval destroyed, stopped in our tracks. Don't let these people speak because goodness knows they might mislead the public. And this is a problem that I have with this attitude within archaeology, which is an attitude fundamentally of disrespect towards the intelligence of the general public. I think sovereign adults should have the right to make up their own minds. They should have the right to explore alternative points of view. Those who are presenting alternative points of view should not be stopped from filming at sites where those alternative points of view can be expressed. It should be an open market in ideas, and the general public is quite intelligent enough to make up its own mind about which idea it supports and which it doesn't. I strongly reject the tendency within a small faction of archaeologists who nevertheless present themselves as speaking for the rest, and who the rest circle the wagons around whenever necessary. I strongly resent their notion that they somehow need to tell the public what to think.
Has it been frustrating for you as somebody who wants to focus on work, not perverse incentives, but the temptation to play defense yourself, given that lots of accusations are coming at you, which then means that if you don't respond, the vacuum of response sometimes sucks in speculation or seems like complicity or a lie through omission or whatever it might be. So this, do you ever sort of feel wistful for how much of your life has been spent this back and forth? I've heard you have this conversation a number of times with Joe. I've heard you do it directly to Flint. It's evident that this has been something that's got under your skin for a long time, and it's been poke continuously. But I think about how much time of both archaeologists doing the debunking and then I think what's now technically referred to as dedunking, which is the reverse of the debunking.
Debunking the mainstream, that's Dan Richards.
Yes.
His channel is called Debunking. He's done some great work, and I'd like to give a shout out to another YouTube channel run by a guy called Independent Scholar. That's his handle. He's done some excellent. It's a very small channel right now, but it deserves to be bigger.
I like that dedunking word. But my point being that so much time of both established mainstream archaeology, yourself, and then from what I can tell, even parts of your psychology, maybe this anger predisposition has played into it a little bit, has been captured by criticism. Criticism captured in many ways.
It's made me defensive. Just take a look at the book that I published in 2002 called Underworld. It's about 1,000 pages long. It's got 2,000 footnotes. I wrote that book defensively. That book describes the 7 years of scuba diving that I and my wife Santa did to look at structures that were submerged by rising sea level at the end of the last ice age. But I made it a very heavy read because I was trying to bulletproof it against the attacks that I knew were going to come. And as a result, it's a much heavier read than most of my books. I don't feel I need to write so defensively now, but I do feel that I need to document and provide the source for every single statement that I make, so that I can't be accused of misrepresenting information. I'm aware that I'm surrounded by a group of hostile people who want to find any error or mistake in my work and magnify it into some kind of conspiracy that Hancock is involved in. Look, when the SAA wrote that open letter to Netflix, it took me a month to research and document my rebuttal to the SAA's open letter. And that rebuttal, part of it, I actually read out during this video I've told you about, but it's on my website, it's in my blog. A detailed rebuttal to the points that I make. So that was a month of my life that I could have been doing something much more constructive with, that I was spent immersed in each and every one of their criticisms to show that those criticisms are not based on anything solid. Yes, it's most unfortunate. Why can't archaeology be a bit kinder and a bit more generous as this? Well, why is it necessary for people who define themselves as scientists? I don't think archaeologists are scientists. I think they're like the lady who protests too much. You know? I think that's a Shakespearean line. They desperately want to be scientists, you know. But you know, why should they have this power? Why should they have this ability to just use their authority to try to shut people down?
I saw an interesting video about pseudo-archaeology and how it's a dangerous gateway. Basically, accusing you of being the beginning of a radicalization pipeline, because questioning the status quo and established theories in archaeology gets you very quickly into Rothschild and lizard people things soon enough.
Well, I think I was amused by my first season of Ancient Apocalypse being called the most dangerous show on Netflix, in newspapers and by archaeologists. And I've never seen why that should be the case, and my rebuttal to the SAA's open letter makes that clear. Just to remind, how did we get onto that point? I'm getting tired.
No, I was saying that what's it been like psychologically dealing with all of the criticism, and then there was this pseudo-archaeology pipeline into danger.
Oh yes, the idea that thinking for oneself about the past might dangerously lead to thinking for oneself about other things too. This has often been connected to the climate change issue. People said, my goodness, if people believe, Hancock, that we're wrong about the past, then they'll believe experts are wrong about climate change as well. And that's one of the reasons why it's seen as dangerous. But behind that is a notion that the public should not be provided with information that can enable them to make choices between different points of view. And I think that's the heart of a democracy. It's the heart of a democratic system, that we should have an open forum for alternative points of view. And rather than despising the public and think that they need to be told what to think by so-called experts who are archaeologists, we should trust the public to make up their own mind on information, and we should provide that information to them. And I don't think that's dangerous. I think what's dangerous is shutting that down.
Can we talk a little bit about Stonehenge? Because there was some recent revelations that came out about the distance that the central rocks had travelled.
Well, one from Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, that's for the people who aren't in the UK. UK is not as big as America, right? But that's a good distance.
You're looking at hundreds of miles.
With a pretty big rock.
With a pretty hefty multi-ton rock.
And that's 4,000 years old?
4,000 or more years old. There's parts of Stonehenge that are much older. There was a Woodhenge at Stonehenge, which may go back as much as 10,000 years into the past. This is a site that was developed over a long period of time. We're looking at the latest incarnation of it at around 4,000 years ago. Another mystery is that the blue stones, the smaller stones at Stonehenge, also don't come from the Marlborough Downs, where Stonehenge stands. They come from Wales. They were brought a distance of more than 100 miles. And in fact, you can see almost see a template of Stonehenge in the Preseli Mountains in Wales, where these stones were cut out of and brought to, you could actually put them back into the gaps that had been left for them. So the ancients were doing something on a very large scale across hundreds of miles to create that site. And of course, we have no documents that have survived from that period, so we don't know why. But what we do know is that Stonehenge, like Serpent Mound, like the Great Sphinx, is oriented at a key moment in the solar year. In the case of Stonehenge, it's sunrise on the summer solstice. In the case of Serpent Mound, it's sunset on the summer solstice. But you can see the connection, that as above, so below, that we're seeing in the Americas, we're also seeing in ancient Britain. And I'm not saying that that's because it came from ancient Britain to ancient America, or from ancient America to ancient Britain. I'm saying that the best explanation for that is that both received a legacy from an older and lost civilization.
Up next, would you ever consider doing any work in Antarctica?
I don't see the point. I don't see the point. I'd love to go to Antarctica and see that magnificence. But what work could I usefully do? I'd have to have a billionaire backer and lots of amazing kit. To start investigating under the ice properly in Antarctica.
Where would you like to go next then, if it's not Antarctica?
I intend to spend the next year refocusing on ancient Egypt. I've been out of ancient Egypt for quite a while, but I've recently mended my fences and established a new friendship with Zahi Hawass, who is the leading Egyptian Egyptologist. And I hope to work with Zahi rather than... We've buried our old conflict, and there was a conflict between us. We've decided that is not fruitful for either of us. He has his point of view, I respect it, and it's based on his lifetime exposure to the mysteries of ancient Egypt, and he comes at it from a mainstream archaeological point of view. I've been exposed to ancient Egypt for 30 years, and I'm coming at it from an alternative point of view, and how interesting to work together. It's the first time I might have a really constructive long-term working relationship with him. So, and it's odd because Zahi and I were once at Gyges, but we're both getting old, and we both feel that there's no point in having bitterness in life. So I want to get back to ancient Egypt, and I want to spend a lot more time there. I think Egypt is the heart of the mystery. That's where ultimately all the stories will come out.
I originally had this plan that obviously you're not aware of because I never told you. But we may be able to make it work, I guess, with your newfound Egyptian contact and your next focus. I wanted to do a podcast at sunrise in front of the pyramids of Giza with you at some point. I imagine that getting the license from the Egyptian government may be difficult. I imagine that all of the technical problems, all the rest of it. But if and when you're ready to do that, I've got the team that can put it together. So
I think we could make it happen. But I would say what you want is sunrise by the Sphinx, or between the Sphinx and the second pyramid, behind the Sphinx.
I'm happy to negotiate.
Looking precisely in the direction of the gaze of the Sphinx, and watch the sun come over the horizon directly in the eye line of the Sphinx. The Sphinx is oriented perfectly to the sunrise at dawn on the spring equinox.
I will allow you to contribute to the location, and maybe we can make that work. Graham Hancock, ladies and gentlemen. Graham, I really appreciate you. I appreciate your bravery to be able to go and do this stuff. The new series, which I got early access to, which is pretty sweet on Netflix, is really awesome. I actually prefer the second series to the first one. I think that the pacing is awesome.
On today's episode of Mile Higher, today we are...
Yesterday was the...
On today's episode of Mile Higher, today we are yet again joined by Graham Hancock.
How is archaeology any different than, say, medicine, other types of sciences?
And it shouldn't be monopolized by a relatively tiny group of professionals who have a much too high opinion of themselves.
Do you worry if a cataclysm happens now, a lot of what we have discovered and built as a civilization will be lost?
For all of these is that they have inherited a shared idea and are manifesting that idea in different periods of history, in different cultures, in slightly different ways. But the idea is what is ancient.
It seems like a lot of people are waking up to that idea.
Definitely.
Do you have hope in the younger generation?
Is it possible that some of them survived? Is there descendants of that civilization still around today?
When I said in the series that I'm public enemy number one to archaeologists, well, that actually is what I am.
Hey, what What's up, everybody?
Welcome back to Mile Higher Podcast, episode 258. And today we are yet again joined by Graham Hancock. If you didn't catch our last episode, we dove into a variety of topics just now.
Yes, we did indeed.
But we're back again to talk about even more.
Yes, I'm very excited for this episode because we're going to be diving into really your forte, your specialty, and that is this question of, was there a lost advanced civilization that existed at the end of the Ice Age? And also, are we a species with amnesia? Are we missing a piece of human prehistory?
Yeah.
And this mystery has driven you for the past 30 years or so.
Yes, it really has since the late 1980s. In fact, since about 1989, all my work was journalism before that, and my books. I did write books in that period, but they were either 70s, 1970s, and the 1980s. They were some travel books and some current affairs books, looking, for example, at the Ethiopian famine in 1984. That book was called Ethiopia, The Challenge of Hunger. Looking at the corruption in the international aid business. I wrote a book called Lords of Poverty. Subtitle was The Freewheeling Lifestyles, Power, Prestige, and Corruption of the Multi-Billion-Dollar Aid Business. And I was looking at foreign aid as an institution, and in those days, criticizing foreign aid was like criticizing motherhood. It was something you just weren't supposed to do. But I had seen so much going wrong with aid in my travels, particularly around Africa, and I felt somebody needed to speak out about it. It's not that I had anything against individual aid workers, but aid as an institution was not help. I found it was very unhelpful to so-called developing countries, and I felt this needed to be pointed out. But around about that same time, traveling widely and traveling in particular in Ethiopia, I came across Ethiopia's claim to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant, and I found it a very interesting claim, since no other country in the world claims to possess that relic. And I began to look into it in depth, and that was what led me ultimately into this investigation into the possibility of a lost civilization of the Ice Age. The book that I wrote about the Ark of the Covenant was called The Sign and the Seal, Quest for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. It was published in 1992. But there were certain aspects of the Ark of the Covenant, as it's described in ancient texts, and as Ethiopians still talk about it today, which didn't seem to fit the context of the times. It seemed like some sort of technological device of some kind. It's very carefully described in the Book of Exodus. Its dimensions are given precisely. It's a wooden box, but it's lined outside and inside with gold, with pure gold, and then supposedly the tablets of stone with the Ten Commandments are placed inside it. But it does all kinds of weird stuff. It lifts its bearers up into the air. It's carried on carrying poles from a group of bearers. Sometimes it will kill them. Sometimes a bolt of fire will flash out from it. It doesn't seem to depend on whether the person is negative or positive. There was a character called Uzzah in the Bible. There was one occasion when the ark was being carried on the back of a cart, and it seemed to be unsteady, and he reached out to steady it, and a bolt of fire lashed out from it and struck him dead, even though his intentions were perfectly good. It seemed to have a hint of technology about it, not simply superstitions about the divine power, but something that didn't quite make sense in the context. And this led me to consider the possibility that there might be something missing in our story, that we shouldn't rule out the possibility of perhaps other kinds of technology, not necessarily our kind of technology, being developed by some civilization. This was one of the reasons why I then went on to write Fingerprints of the Gods, which was published in 1995, and which is probably my best known book in this area, that's where I really went in depth into investigating the possibility of a lost civilization of the Ice Age. And obviously, as the years have gone by, I've refined my thinking on this and learned a lot as I've gone along. And I'd like to make this clear at the outset when talking about a lost advanced civilization, is I don't mean a civilization like
like flying cars.
No, and
robots
and robots and all our stuff. I don't mean that at all. I believe that all human civilizations have emerged out of shamanism. I think shamanism is the fundamental basis of human civilization, and it's the fundamental basis of knowledge. And shamanism can be very scientific in its pursuits and in its investigations. And I think that's the basement, that's the foundation of all human cultures. And some human cultures have taken that foundation and gone in one direction, and some have gone in other directions. So, I'm often criticized for saying that some kind of weird advanced civilization came and taught indigenous people stuff. No, that's not what it's about. That so-called advanced civilization emerged out of shamanism itself. And it was an indigenous civilization, and I believe it was present all over the world. But it began for me with a series of problems and questions about the past and about the way that the past is explained. And amongst those issues, two in particular stand out. One is evidence of extraordinarily advanced knowledge of the cosmos and of the Earth's place in the solar system at a very early date, just about as early as you can go. When you look at ancient texts like the Rig Veda in India, for example, there is evidence long before the Greeks, who are credited with being the first discoverers of a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. There is evidence that cultures long before that, going back into the mists of time, in the oldest myths and traditions that we know, are encoded a series of numbers and a certain symbolism, which is often the symbolism of a great mill turning in the heavens. And in fact, I like to recommend books by other authors. And the book that I recommend, and the book that was key in my own journey, was written by two professors of the history of science back in the 1960s, or perhaps 69, 1970. Their names were Giorgio de Santillana, who was a professor of the history of science at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Hertha von Deschen, who was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. And it's a monumental work of research and investigation. And they demonstrated complete, at any rate to my satisfaction, nobody has ever really successfully faulted that there was a highly sophisticated knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes, that it's impossible to trace how far back it goes. It just goes back thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years. And they attribute it to what they call some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization that first came to understand the world in terms of number and measure. And I mean, to cut a long story short, precession is an observed phenomenon. At the moment, if you take the North Pole of the Earth, the axis of the Earth, and you extend the North Pole up into the heavens, you will find that is pointing at a particular star, pretty much. And that star is called Polaris. And that's our pole star in our time. But it hasn't always been the pole star. And it won't always be the pole star. Because there's a wobble on the axis of the Earth. And therefore, that extended North Pole is actually transcribing a great circle in the heavens. And sometimes it will point at empty space, and sometimes it will point at another star. There have been a number of stars in the past that have been pole stars. Tuban in Draco was a pole star about 4,000 years ago. At the same time, and this is where it edges into what we now call astrology. There are the 12 constellations of the zodiac, and why are they recognized as such? Because they are the constellations against the background of which the sun rises, according to a very definite schedule. The greatest interest in ancient times was what constellation houses the sun on the spring equinox. What constellation is rising behind the sun? The sun is seen to be in the grip of that constellation at dawn on the spring equinox. And in our time, that is the constellation of Pisces. We live in the age of Pisces. Within a lifetime or two, it will have shifted into the constellation of Aquarius, and we do live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius at dawn on the spring equinox. Before Pisces, it was Aries. Before Aries, it was Taurus. And you can go back and back and back and back and back. And whether it's to do with the pole star or whether it's to do with the constellation that houses the sun at dawn on the spring equinox, these changes are all caused by that wobble on the axis of the Earth. It's our viewing platform from which we observe the stars. As it changes its orientation in the heavens, naturally the orientation and the rising times of particular stars will change. It's thought that the Greeks, perhaps as recently as less than 200 BC, 2,200 years ago or so, were the discovery of precession. But what Santillana and Bondeshen absolutely demonstrated is that they were simply rediscovered or redefined, much older language. Now, it takes a long time to observe this. You have to be very precise to observe this. It unfolds at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. The whole cycle takes 25,920 years to complete. And to observe it precisely and predict it accurately and know exactly what's going on, and then to create a symbol for it, a great mill turning in the heavens, and to use that symbol and to combine it with numbers that are referenced in myths and traditions all around the world, they detected the fingerprints of an ancient science in them, which had largely been forgotten, but the key elements of it were remembered through great storytelling, through myth, through traditions, and through the notion of world ages. And this is definitely the work of something that we would need to recognize as a civilization with scientific focus. And that is a civilization that can and did arise out of shamanism. Shamans are very observant of the cosmos and of what is going on in the cosmos. Second thing is the existence of ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. We know pretty well how the world looked during the last ice age. And what is the big change? The big change is that during the ice age, sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. That means that huge amounts of land that were above water during the ice age are now under water. And therefore, it's odd to find maps which were drawn in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, but where the map makers tell us that they were using much older source maps that were falling apart, that they were trying to preserve the information in those maps, copied them onto their new maps, and lo and behold, they show the world as it looked during the last ice age. They show Antarctica in maps drawn in the 1500s, based on older source maps, when our civilization didn't even know Antarctica existed until 1820. But there it is, in all its glory, on these much more ancient maps. And then another problem, many of these maps, particularly the so-called portolanos, which are all copies of older source maps, but often incorporate new knowledge that was discovered at the time that the map makers were working, that these contain extremely accurate relative longitudes. And longitude is a scientific issue, which our civilization didn't crack until the middle of the 18th century. In fact, there was a huge prize, an unbelievable prize. I believe it was a million British pounds that was offered for anybody who could crack the longitude problem. Well, longitude's really important if you're sailing, if you're navigating at sea, because if you don't know your longitude, you might be 300 miles east or west of where you think you are, and you might crash into a coastline that you're not expecting. It's really useful to know exactly what your longitude is. But it took a very accurate chronometer that would keep accurate time at sea despite the rolling motion of the ship before our civilization was able to solve the problem of longitude. Solve the longitude problem roughly in the 1750s onwards when we solved it. And yet here are these ancient maps with extremely accurate relative longitude. long before we solved it, and those maps themselves are based on even older sources. So these curiosities led me to think that it's worth exploring the possibility that our historians and archaeologists don't know everything about the past, that there might be new things to learn about the past, that there might be a forgotten episode in the human story, as virtually every one of the great myths and traditions around the world insists on. And that set me on my journey to explore this possibility. That, and while I was researching the previous book, The Sign and the Seal, finding myself in the presence of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, which is just the most unbelievable, staggering, extraordinary work of beauty and art and science. The Great Pyramid is an incredibly complicated monument, but those who built it had an enormous knowledge, which they manifested in the Great Pyramid. And I'll tell you a bit more about that as we go on.
Yeah, God. So for those that don't understand, what is mainstream academia's view on those maps you just referenced? Like, why don't they see the same thing that you do?
They think it's just fantasies of the map makers.
They're just like having fun, take a best crack at what it looks like.
Just make stuff up. Make up Antarctica.
Yeah.
Just make it up.
Why? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, they say that those map makers had the idea that the Earth somehow needed to be balanced.
Oh, so there's got to be land at the bottom, land at the top.
Yeah, and in fact, even though there actually isn't much land around the North Pole, it's mostly sea ice.
Yeah.
Whereas Antarctica is a true continent.
Huge continent.
Yeah, which is buried under ice. So I mean, they're welcome to their view, but I don't agree with it. I think we're looking at hints and clues that something is missing in our story, and I made it my focus for many years to try and identify what that missing thing could be, and to try to show that archaeology, most archaeologists would deny this, and I know lots of individual archaeologists who I like very much, but again, as was the case with my book critiquing foreign aid, I'm looking at archaeology as an institution which has a particular narrative to tell, and whether they like it or not, the narrative of the institution of archaeology is that archaeology is the sole arbiter and the sole voice that has a right to speak authoritatively about our past, and that we should basically accept everything that archaeologists say. This is why some archaeologists were so annoyed with me about my Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Because, I wasn't repeating their narrative.
Yeah.
I was telling a different story and saying, look into different possibilities. I couldn't do anything that I do without the work that archaeologists have done. And I want to pay tribute to archaeologists for that. They do a lot of hard, gritty work. Very, very important work. But like any profession, any science that gets committed to a particular paradigm, it's very difficult to see outside the boundaries of that paradigm. So I was astonished, even though I kind of expected it. I was astonished when the Society for American Archaeologists, egged on by a couple of very furious archaeologists, one of whom has been stalking my work for 30 years. I was surprised when the Society for American Archaeologists wrote an open letter to Netflix demanding that my documentary series be reclassified as science fiction, and saying that archaeology already knew for an absolute fact that there was no possibility of a lost civilization during the Ice Age. And I don't understand how they could know that. I don't get it. It's actually a lie. They don't know it for an absolute fact. It's important to realize a number of things about archaeology. A lot of archaeology that gets done doesn't get done because of a targeted search for something specific. It may be, particularly in the industrialized technological societies, it may be because a dam is being built or a new highway is being built. And rightly and properly, before that land is overturned and destroyed to create the new dam or the new highway, they want to find out if there's anything of archaeological interest in there. So they'll call in archaeologists, and archaeologists will check the landscape out and look and do some digging. And if they find anything of archaeological interest, they will report it and publish it in peer-reviewed journals and so on and so forth. But that leaves huge areas of even the industrialized technological society which have never been studied by archaeologists at all. Never looked at for a moment, because there's not been the funding or the reason to look there. They haven't had justification in their minds to spend scarce funds on looking there. And the other thing is that there are very large areas of the world that archaeology has barely looked at all. I'm not saying that no archaeology has been done in these areas, but the Sahara Desert, for example, is largely underserved by archaeology. It's not that no archaeology has been done, but very minimal archaeology has been done in an area that covers 9 million square kilometers. Okay, and we know for sure from paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climate, that the Sahara Desert went through a number of phases of being green and fertile during the Ice Age. As a matter of fact, some of those ancient maps that I talked about show a green and fertile Sahara. And they show river channels running through it where we now know that river channels did run through the Sahara. So it was an area at one time, particularly during the Ice Age, when the northern hemisphere was really unpleasant in many ways, and frozen, and dry, and inhospitable. It would be natural to migrate to warmer areas, especially if they were fertile. And the Sahara Desert, several episodes during and after the Ice Age, was a very fertile place. So it seems to me quite a serious omission to say that we know everything, we know so much that we can absolutely rule out the possibility of a lost civilization of the Ice Age, but we haven't looked very much at the Sahara Desert. Likewise, the Amazon rainforest. Again, largely for economic reasons, this is an area that has been underserved by archaeology. There's been very little study of the Amazon. Not none. Important to make that point, but not much.
Yo, what's up?
And
what's up, MNY Dust?
5 million plus square kilometers of the Amazon rainforest, still covered by dense canopy, which has hardly seen any archaeological attention at all. And yet, the latest investigations in the Amazon, and I'm as I mentioned, I have nothing against individual archaeologists. There's some great archaeologists who are beginning to dip their toes in the water of doing the real research in the Amazon. I'm in touch with a team who are doing LiDAR work in the Amazon, where they use light aircraft to send beams of light down through the canopy, and they can see what's lying underneath the canopy. And they're finding these giant geometrical earthworks in the Amazon, and evidence of very large populations that once lived in the Amazon before the horrendous catastrophe of the Spanish conquest of South America and of Mexico. The Spanish sent ahead of them terrible diseases like smallpox, and those populations which did exist in the Amazon supported millions of people. Those populations were decimated, destroyed by smallpox, and within 100 years their cities were overgrown, their rainforest, and it's only now that they're being rediscovered. So how can archaeology say, we know enough about the past to be absolutely certain that there was no lost civilization, and they haven't really studied the Sahara Desert, and they haven't really studied the Amazon rainforest? And then, in addition to that, huge issue is that sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. That 400-foot sea level, it didn't happen overnight. It was spread out over thousands of years, but there were episodes of very rapid sea level rise, very sudden and rapid sea level rise, which are mysterious in themselves. The bottom line is that 27 million square kilometers of land, and that was the best land on Earth during the Ice Age, that was above water during the Ice Age, is underwater now. And yes, there is some marine archaeology. Yes, archaeologists are beginning to consider the possibility that it's worth looking at the flooded continental shelves. Some preliminary work has been done, but most marine archaeology has been about shipwrecks from the medieval period. They're looking for shipwrecks because they don't believe that there's anything really that's going to change their view of the past. So their preconception of what might be found has governed what they actually do. And again, of course, financial reasons. It's very expensive to explore underwater. So there we have 9 million square kilometers in the Sahara Desert, 5 million plus square kilometers still left in the Amazon. It was bigger, 7 plus million square kilometers, and 27 million square kilometers of the flooded continental shelves. And then we have the fact that archaeology that has been done elsewhere has largely been in response to roads and dams and other big construction projects and not targeted searches. So they simply cannot say that they have enough evidence to rule out the possibility of a lost civilization. And to say that is just call a thing what it is. It's a lie. It's not true.
Life is expensive, and these days it's so easy to get yourself into debt. And once you're in debt, it's always a pain to get out of debt. So how many of you out there wish there was a better solution to paying off your debt? Well, PDS Debt has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. With rising interest rates and the cost of living at an all-time high, now's the time to finally take initiative with your debt. Stop waiting and start saving with your own custom debt savings options from PDS Debt. PDS Debt is giving our qualified listeners a free debt savings analysis just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/mh. You'll receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. For me personally, when I got out of college, I was dealing with tons of credit card debt, and I was just making minimum payments just to pay that interest, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So I actually used a program much like PDS Debt to roll all my payments into a low interest monthly payment, and I was able to get out of debt completely in a matter of a year or so. And that's exactly what PDS Debt offers. They offer a program to help you get all of your debt and balances down in a much, much more feasible way. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest payment, and everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted, which is always great to hear. Save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time like I did. PDS Debt is offering free debt analysis to our listeners just for completing the quick and easy debt assessment. Again, at www.pdsdebt.com/mh. That's pdsdebt.com/mh. Take back your financial freedom today by visiting pdsdebt.com/mh.
Can we go back a little bit to the rainforest?
Yeah.
I really think it would be so interesting to our audience to hear a little bit more about the possibility that there were these giant cities in the Amazon, that they were as big as London, multiple.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how they kept all of these people fed was through this soil called terra preta.
Yeah, terra preta, Black Earth.
Can you explain that?
One of the problems with trusting large populations of rainforest is that rainforests are actually, despite their exuberance, are not particularly fertile soil. The fertility of the soil is caused by the fall of leaves and the decaying of vegetation. But if you remove the trees within a relatively short time, the soil will become infertile. Terra preta, sometimes known as the Black Earth, is a man-made soil. Human beings invented it, and the earliest so far found. But remember, so little study has been done in it.
So we don't even know for sure.
Say again?
We don't know for sure then if this hasn't been around previously.
We don't know, but what we do know is it's been around at least 9,000 years. I believe it's been around a lot longer than that. People found a way to make the Amazon productive for human beings in two ways. First of all, by inventing this soil, which is still sought after today by anybody seeking to settle and create agriculture in the Amazon. They can find patches of terra preta. They're going to be able to grow anything they need to grow. It's self-replicating soil. It's full of bacteria and organisms that create its fertility. It's quite a miracle of human creation, and that is the scientific work of the Amazonian peoples, and it's at least 9,000 years old. And goodness knows what else remains to be discovered there. So that's the first point. The second point about that is that, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that the Amazon itself is a man-made ecosystem. It is designed to serve the interests of human beings. If you look at what are called the hyperdominant trees in the Amazon, they are all trees that produce foods that are needed by human beings. And other trees that are not useful to human beings are much less present in the Amazon. So the whole thing was created to serve humanity. And human beings who lived in balance with their ecosystem up until the time of the Spanish conquest. Again, this is a science, like all sciences everywhere, that ultimately, if you trace it back far enough, you're going to find it emerged out of shamanism and about shamanistic curiosity, about the nature of reality and the nature of the universe. we talked in the last episode about ayahuasca.
Right.
Very powerful, visionary brew. Ayahuasca is also a work of science that was the creation of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, who I think we must recognize as a civilization in every possible way.
If not advanced, I mean, that seems pretty advanced.
I think we need to recognize them as an advanced civilization. We just need to redefine what we describe as advanced.
Yeah,
in
I
some
think
way.
that's where people.
And,
get
advanced isn't necessarily motor cars and airplanes and plastic. There's lots of ways to be advanced. And in the case of the Amazon, ayahuasca, highly effective visionary brew, is only possible. It's important for viewers to understand this, that dimethyltryptamine, DMT, probably the most powerful psychedelic known to science, is not normally orally accessible. That's why people smoke it or vape it. But what they found in the Amazon was a way to make it orally accessible. And that's because the leaves of the chacruna plant contain DMT, pure DMT. But you can't have a trip if you consume or drink a tea made from those leaves, because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase, which switches off DMT in contact. So therefore you need a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Now this is a scientific procedure.
Right, yeah.
You need a monoamine oxidase inhibitor in the brew, which is going to shut down that enzyme in the gut and allow the DMT to be absorbed orally. And that's what they found. That's what they discovered in the Amazon. God knows how long.
Who knows how long? That's
Thousands and thousands of years ago for sure. Thousands of years ago. And it's an extraordinary achievement when you consider the 100,000 plus different species of plants and trees that exist in the Amazon. To do that solely by trial and error, to put together the most powerful hallucinogen known to science. I don't like that word. The most powerful psychedelic known to science. To put it together with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor in, I have to admit, a foul-tasting brew, and enable visions to take place, which in Amazonian society, in indigenous society, are seen as valuable information. We've been taught to trivialize visionary experiences and regard them as some kind of nonsense. But all those archaeologists who think that I attack indigenous societies in some way, which I never do, I have the highest respect for indigenous cultures, they're not recognizing the science that is present in those cultures, the advanced nature of the science. The discovery of ayahuasca is an extraordinary achievement in itself, and then the realization that ayahuasca has useful teachings to bring to us, which Western science dismisses entirely, but which is fundamental to Amazonian civilization, is the second most important thing. So they create a brew, and that brew allows us to gain access to knowledge that would not otherwise be available to us. Sometimes quite practical knowledge. Shamans will use the altered state of consciousness to identify where particular game animals that they wish to hunt are congregating. They will leave their body, go up into the astral and look down on this place, and then they'll come back and say, that's where you need to go to hunt. So it's used for practical purposes as well as for spiritual purposes. So the question of the city, there was a Spanish traveler Carvajal, who crossed the entire width of South America in the 1540s, some years after the conquest of Peru had begun. A little longer.
No, Cartman's out.
Wasn't his
Cartman's gone. Cartman,
20 other guards.
You're gone. You're out, Cartman. I disagree with everything said by that AI bot. He's out. Pausing the stream to cancel Cartman. You're out, Cartman. You're done.
Just carried them ever eastwards until after a year they finally came out in the Atlantic Ocean.
I love Jewish people.
They came out in the Atlantic Ocean. And on the way, yes, he reported seeing a huge city, sophisticated, with advanced arts and highly popular. Within 100 years, other Spaniards were in there exploring. They couldn't find the site. So they said, he must have made it. And that's what academia continued to say until the LiDAR work began to be done in the Amazon, which revealed that, in fact, those cities, those huge habitation, often joined by straight roadways that run for 100 kilometers or more from one settlement to another, did exist in the Amazon. Why weren't they found 100 years after the Carvajal? They weren't found because smallpox had utterly destroyed their population. And once those populations were gone, they weren't able to keep the rainforest at bay, and it consumed those cities. And they're only being found now. So there's a whole hidden history of humanity awaiting us in the Amazon. I'm very glad that some teams of archaeologists are now beginning to do really exciting work in the Amazon, and I'm closely in contact with those teams, and I think that we're going to get a whole new vision of the past of humanity from the work that they're doing.
Well, and just the fact that there's still uncontacted tribes there.
They're still uncontacted tribes, yeah.
That are living.
That's absolutely right. The Amazon is the last preserve that has not really been completely corrupted by Western industrial civilization, they don't want it. They don't want anything to do with it.
Can one of the mods delete that message? I can't delete it.
I've talked to shamans.
Oh, delete message.
They see the doom of
Delete
mankind
message.
in the behavior of Western technological civilizations. When I say Western, I'm including Russia and China as well. These are all technological, following the technological model where tech is the answer to everything. And it's all about production
this one.
And consumption and no
delete
connection
message.
to spirit. They see that as the slippery slope that will lead us on the road to ruin. So we have much to learn from Amazonian civilization and from the lost past of humanity that is hidden in the Amazon and that is only now beginning to be revealed. Already, one phenomenon are these huge geometrical enclosures that are being found in the Amazon. They're earthworks. Now, I don't know if you've been to England or not, but in England we have famously Stonehenge. And we have a number of other henges. Avebury Henge is a particularly beautiful one. Actually, the word henge means an earthwork. When stone circles are erected inside it becomes something a bit more complicated. It's got the big megaliths inside it.
Ooh,
and there are
he's
those
done.
in some of the
Cartman's gone.
as well. But those huge geometrical earthworks are almost
Cartman's
indistinguishable
gone.
from the henges that you find in Europe, and particularly in Britain. Now, I am not saying that people from Britain, thousands of years ago, brought to the Amazon and taught them how to build henges. And I'm not saying that people from the Amazon went to Britain and taught the Brits how to build henges either. I'm saying that both seem to have been in receipt of a common idea, handed down from, to quote Santillana and Vondesha, some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization of remote antiquity. Therefore, it's fascinating to see these enclosures in the Amazon, these earthworks on a very large scale. One of them, called Tequinho, is clearly a geometrical exercise on a huge scale to square the circle, something that geometers have long been interested in. You have a circular earthwork surrounded by a square earthwork that touches at the 4 points around the circle. You have enormous enclosures that are perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west. That tells you that astronomers worked in the creation of those enclosures. And in some cases, they go back very far. And those found thus far go back at least as far as 3,000, maybe more than 3,000 years ago. But I want to know what else is going to be found in that 5 million square kilometers that hasn't been investigated yet at all. We're just touching the edge of a huge mystery in the Amazon. And interestingly, the geometrical enclosures that have been identified thus far, particularly in the state of Acre in Brazil, contain in their design some connections to ayahuasca visions, which are also full of geometry, and to a particular notion of the Tucano people of the entrance to the other world, which is a geometrical enclosure, and which looks just like some of these enclosures that are on the ground today. So we're seeing science in the form of the creation of these huge geometrical, perfectly oriented structures, and we're seeing it connected to spirituality as well.
So this is why you say the origins are shamanistic,
I believe the origins of all civilization are shamanistic, and once that origin is there, then it's up to different cultures to choose which route they take. which way they go. I think that we are dealing with a lost civilization that was shamanistic in its basis, and that pursued a route that was capable of doing all the accurate, detailed measurement over hundreds of years to work out precession of the equinoxes and work out what was causing it, and to regard that information as so important that they encoded it in incredible stories and traditions that were then passed down through the generations. Those number systems keep on cropping up again and again and again and again.
It sounds
Key number is 73.
just like Nick.
1 degree
It's
of
wild.
precision. Let's hold your finger up to the horizon, and 1 degree of precession is the width of your finger against the horizon. Hard to observe in one lifetime. You need multiple lifetimes. You need people watching and keeping records for long periods of time in order to get this nailed and understand what is happening.
So that's why you don't, because like your critics will say, well, all these civilizations all did it on their own.
Yeah.
That they, this idea that there was this older advanced civilization that taught everybody how to do stuff is absolutely ridiculous. They did it all on their own.
That's what my critics say.
Yeah, and so
they think that I'm trying to steal the achievements of indigenous society and hand them over to some sort of civilization like ours.
Right.
No, that's not what I'm doing. That's a misrepresentation of my position.
Oh, I had to go for it. I had to YOLO it. I had to do it.
Or watches the series will see that is not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm doing. I think we're looking at a civilization that emerged out of shamanism and took a particular route. And of course it was an indigenous civilization in its own time, in its own place. But what they don't like is the notion that certain knowledge and information accumulated by that culture was passed down all around the world, so that you find the same essential ideas in Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, in the Amazon rainforest, in Mexico, in Guatemala, amongst the Mayan culture, for example. The same essential ideas are being repeated. The same story of a great flood, which brought a former age of the world to an end. The same story of survivors of that flood who went around the world trying to reincarnate or give rebirth to what they had created and shared their knowledge with other peoples around the world. This is truly a pan-American myth. It's found right across the Americas, and archaeologists are now trying to claim that myth was entirely made up by Spaniards. But it's complete rubbish. It long predated the Spaniards. And it's found in many, many countries, in Central America, South America, and in North America. And it's an indigenous tradition that has been passed down through the ages. That there was a cataclysm.
it's not just coincidence, Graham. Right?
I don't believe it's coincidence.
Yeah.
I believe that it's worth considering the possibility of a remote common ancestor, which passed down key information that was inherited by later cultures and then used in various ways. An example that's really worth giving is the Great Pyramid itself, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Which we don't know how old it is. Like
I'm willing to accept that the Great Pyramid, in the form that we see it now, was largely completed by the ancient Egyptians. But remember that in dynastic time, in other words, between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago. But remember that the ancient Egyptians tell us in many of their texts that everything they knew was a legacy. It was all an inheritance of the gods. And I don't construe the gods as alien. It was a legacy of the gods, and they speak of a time called Zet Tepi, the first time, which followed a cataclysmic episode when the gods brought this knowledge to Egypt and passed it down. Now, in the case of the Great Pyramid and the whole Giza Plateau, I think if we were to, this is my view, and it's based on a great deal of research which is entirely dismissed by archaeologists. Whenever they dismiss my work, they don't really get to grips with the work itself. It's just a narrative they don't want to hear. Right. So they dismiss it. But if I were to try to envisage the Giza Plateau 12,500 years ago, I think what we'd see is an enormous rock-hewn statue of a lion, facing due east, perfectly due east, where the sun rises on the spring afternoon. Sun rises perfectly due east in the northern hemisphere on the 21st of May. If you go to the summer solstice, it's rising far to the north of us. If you go to the winter solstice, it's rising far to the south of these. But on the spring equinox, it's perfectly due east. So there's this huge lion statue with a massive leonine head.
Bro,
and lion's mane.
dude.
And it's been created by
That's
carving it out
exactly
of
what you were
bedrock,
just
creating a
talking about,
trench
man.
around
What
it.
the
And it
fuck?
faces the rising sun at dawn on the spring
Dude.
equinox, as it still does today.
That's exactly what you were talking
12,500
about, man. The
years
lag
ago, The
manipulation for
rising sun at dawn
51.
on the spring equinox was housed by the constellation of Leo, the constellation that we recognize and many cultures have recognized as a lion. So, as above, so below, this lion monument gazing at its celestial counterpart rising behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. I believe that the megalithic temples that we see in front of the Great Sphinx, the so-called Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple, these are colossal megalithic works, were also there at that time, around 12,500 years ago. And what happened was that in later times, the ancient Egyptians, who were the inheritors of the culture that originally established the Giza, that the ancient Egyptians found it necessary to restore and modify some very ancient monuments. So that's why on the Valley Temple, which is in front of, but a little to the south of the Great Sphinx, that's why on the Valley Temple, we see that it's created in two stages. The first stage is the core limestone blocks, and they are massive, hundreds of tons in some cases, certainly up to 200 tons in the case of some of these megalithic temples on the Giza Plateau. But the limestone is heavily eroded. And then in dynastic times, they took the trouble to bring granite to the Giza Plateau, and then to cut that granite so that it fitted the existing erosion pattern on the much older limestone and fit it onto them there. That shows two things. It shows, first of all, that they respected the limestone blocks, and secondly, it shows that the granite facing is younger than the limestone blocks itself. And there is nothing, not a single inscription in those temples which says this was built by Pharaoh such and such and such and such.
Yeah.
I think that where the three great pyramids stand, the pyramids that are now attributed to Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, I think what stood there at that time were low platforms, megalithic platforms. In the case of the Great Pyramid, they didn't need to do much because the Great Pyramid itself is built around a natural hillock. And deep underneath it, 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid is a chamber, subterranean chamber, hewn out of solid bedrock. I think that was the original sacred site on the Giza Plateau. And the Great Pyramid, originally a platform, was completed in the time of the ancient Egyptians, using knowledge that was passed down from that much more ancient time. Now, why it operated in two phases like this, you know, in ancient cultures that took the heavens seriously and that understood the notion of world ages, 12,500 years ago was a very dramatic time on our planet. This was the 12,800 years ago was the onset of the Younger Dryas, which is a catastrophic climate episode.
Made me think
which
of
is where
undiscovered
the Earth has been
clips.
emerging quite slowly and almost pleasantly from the ice.
Was
suddenly goes back into a dramatic deep.
the new control
Weirdly, at the
strat
same time, there's an almost
where you
instant
throw
sea
the
level
two
rise
mines
recorded, for example, in
and you
Bahamian
don't
Forest, which
take
only exist at a certain
damage
beneath the surface of the sea.
from
That's all, because
both mines or
this is
whatever,
a
but you
time
still
where
get
the
the
world's climate
insane
has suddenly gone
speed
very cold. It was
and
warming up
lag.
and then it goes as cold as it was at the
I wonder
peak
if
of
you
the
could
last
do
ice age.
that,
You
throw
wouldn't
like
expect
2 mines
to
and
see
then
sea level rise happening. The work of Cesare Emiliani has
you
proved
like
sea level rise
explode through
did occur.
something.
Then you have about 1,200
Like I'm thinking
years
even Aztec
of true horror
glass.
on this planet. That's the time that
And I was
all the
thinking,
great
can you really
mega
time it with
planets, the
grenades
ice
like
age,
that? Like
the-
maybe that'd be
we're all
insane. You
familiar
could
with
shoot the
Saber-toothed
grenades.
tigers, the woolly rhino,
Can you imagine get
the
through the
mammoths,
Aztec
the
glass like that?
mastodons, giant sloths. They were everywhere.
2
then,
mines.
but they all went extinct during the underground.
Because people were
So clearly, this
trying
was
the quick
very bad
pausing
time.
Aztec
It could
glass.
wipe out just huge numbers of animal species that were very
It's
successful.
like infinite health.
There's evidence
clip
of
through, I
a
think,
collapse
but
in human population.
If you
Very
have 2
It
explosions,
may have been. I believe that's the time.
I don't know if it works
where
with
we
grenades,
lost
though.
track of an episode in our story, where
That'd
we
be
lost track of
interesting
an
to see.
earlier civilization that not our civilization, not like us. We should never look for ourselves.
Yeah.
But but a civilization that was capable of exploring and navigating the Earth, that understood the dimensions of the Earth, and that understood how the Earth looked and was capable of creating accurate maps.
Yeah, the new control.
Incorporated into the Great Pyramid.
New control
are the
glass.
dimensions of our planet. And again, yes, Egyptologists know that this is the case, but they regard it as a coincidence.
There's a new Carl Jobst video that explains it very well.
That I like to bring home, and this is that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, measure that, and multiply it by the same number, 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. So the key dimensions of our planet are encoded on a scale of 1 to 43,200 in the Great Pyramid. And to tell us that
I think that's what they did for Dune speedrunners. Maybe they've done that for GoldenEye, I don't know.
I mean, that is a tiny, tiny error on a monument that weighs 6 million tons and has a footprint of 13 acres. So it's speaking to the Earth, and it encodes the dimensions of the Earth. But archaeologists say, what's so special about 43,200? It's just random. But no, I'm sorry, it's not random. It's 600 times 72. It's one of those numbers generated by the precession of the equinoxes. 43,200 is a number that occurs in many ancient texts and traditions, or 432,000 multiples of the same number keep on coming up again and again and again. And that is a number system that is generated by a key motion of the Earth itself. So, how clever can you get? Yes. You have a gigantic monument which nobody understands how anybody could build it in the first place. You almost perfectly align it to true north. You then encode the dimensions of the Earth in that monument, and the scale you use is the scale defined by a key motion of the Earth itself. I mean, come on. Yeah. This cannot be an accident.
It seems so obvious.
We're looking at science. We are looking at an ancient lost science that the ancient Egyptians were the inheritors of, as they themselves loudly and frequently proclaim. It's just that archaeologists don't want them to say that.
Yeah,
it's interesting with the king lists in ancient Egypt. There are king lists all over the temples. For example, the temple of Seti I in Abydos, lists of kings. And actually, Egyptologists use those king lists in formulating their chronology of ancient Egypt. And they're fine with the king list as long as they go back only to the first dynasty. But the problem is the king lists go back further. They go back more than 30,000 years into the past. Those archaeologists ignore and dismiss as myth and fantasy. And again, they claim they're the ones with respect for indigenous cultures. They're not respecting the indigenous culture of ancient Egypt with the knowledge that it manifested. They said our kings were not confined to the first dynasty onwards. There were rulers who went back thousands and tens of thousands of years before that. We should listen carefully to all of these things.
I think that's what's so frustrating about it too, is that they come from this place of we're just trying to respect these ancient cultures, but they're really dismissing them.
They're very dismissive.
Especially to say that all of this is just coincidence.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, you ask one of these mainstream archaeologists, they say they respect indigenous culture. Ask them if they respect shamanistic views about the other world, about the world we enter in the deep.
Well, it's like, come on, man.
About how we can encounter the spirits of deceased relatives in that world. Archaeologists do know that. Can't be. That's just their fantasy. That's just the story they tell themselves. Archaeologists don't know that.
Yeah, totally.
That's their prejudice. They are being prejudiced against indigenous cultures in that world. And they're subtly in their subconscious, they know they're doing it. And they're wearing their guilt at the way that they put down indigenous cultures, and then they want to project it onto other people.
Yes,
that's the game.
Exactly right.
It seems like everything you do in the digital world, whether it's apps or streaming services, involves you signing up for a subscription, and it's very easy to lose track of all those subscriptions. And most of the time we sign up for subscriptions for, to watch a specific show or use a specific product, but after so long we just stop using it, or we're using those services, and we forget that we're paying for those subscriptions. I know for me personally, I probably am subscribed to 10 to 20 different services, and I would say probably like half of those I don't even use anymore. And I didn't even know I was still paying for most of those until I hooked myself up with Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. It's over 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about, and chances are you're one of them. Like that Stars app just to watch one show, or that free gaming trial you never actually used. Rocket Money will quickly and easily find your subscriptions for you, and for any you don't want to pay for anymore, just hit cancel, which is so nice. That's like one of the biggest things I don't go and cancel them on my own, is it's just a big pain in the butt. But Rocket Money will cancel it for you. It's that easy. Rocket Money also helps you manage all of your finances in one place and automatically categorizes your expenses. So you can easily track your budget in real time and also get alerted if anything looks off. They've got credit monitoring, they monitor your credit card usage. It really is a great tool to help you get organized when it comes to your personal finances. Over 3 million people, including myself, have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/milehigher. That's rocketmoney.com/milehigher. Check it out today, rocketmoney.com/milehigher. I mean, it's just crazy. We've talked about, alternative theories of how the pyramids were built.
Yeah.
And those out there in that field get all up in arms about it. Or if you say it wasn't the ancient Egyptian people that built it, or didn't do it in this certain way,
or they brought knowledge from somewhere else.
Yeah. Right.
Access something.
Yeah,
or there was technology that they accessed.
That gets everybody very upset. The reasons that I would never seek to divorce the ancient Egyptians from the Great Pyramids are there are several reasons. But first and foremost, I have no doubt that the ancient Egyptians were involved in completing the Great Pyramids, and there's 4 reasons. And that is the shafts, the so-called air shafts, that cut through the body of the Great Pyramid. They're very small. They're about that wide. There are 2 of them in the so-called King's Chamber, one on the north wall, one on the south wall.
Mm-hmm.
And they always exited on the outside of the pyramid, and that was known back into the 19th century. 19th century explorers could actually climb the Great Pyramid and roll a cannonball into one of those shafts, and it would end up in the King's Chamber. So obviously, they were connected. The shafts in the so-called Queen's Chamber, and I use the word so-called because we actually don't know what these chambers were. No burial of any pharaoh was ever found. The so-called Queen's Chamber, the shafts don't exit on the outside, and nor until 1872 were they visible within the Queen's Chamber itself. They'd been closed off with facing blocks. You couldn't see that they were there. But one researcher went around tapping on the walls. He thought, there's shafts upstairs in the King's Chamber. Maybe there are here. And he found 2 hollow points, one on the north wall, one on the south wall, broke them open, and lo and behold, there were the concealed shafts. Now the thing about those shafts is that all 4 of them point at key stars, one of them being the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, in the position in the sky that they occupied around 2,500 BC, not 12,500 years ago, but 4,500 years ago. And that astronomical connection to the stars at that time says to me, we cannot divorce the ancient Egyptians from the Great Pyramid. But then there's a problem. The ground pattern on the 3 pyramids on the ground reflects the pattern of Orion's belt itself. Yeah. And this is, of course, no accident within the ancient Egyptian system, because the constellation of Orion was seen as the celestial image of the god Osiris, the civilization bringer, the entity who went around the world teaching civilization. That is who Osiris is. And he is seen in the sky. His image is seen in the sky as the constellation of Orion. And one of those shafts points at Orion's belt, and another one points at Sirius, and 2 of them point at the circumpolar star. At the time when Egyptologists believed the pyramids were built. So there's definitely a connection, and I wouldn't seek to break it. But the problem is that the pattern of the 3 pyramids on the ground is the pattern of the 3 stars of the belt of Orion. And this has also changed subtly over the ages as a result of precession. So although the shafts in the Great Pyramid lock that monument to the epoch of 2,500 BC, the pattern of the pyramids on the ground reflecting Orion's belt, effectively it's like you want to make a painting of Orion's belt. You paint it on an easel and then you lay it down flat in front of you. That's what you have on the Giza Plateau. They reflect the pattern of Orion's belt and its relationship to the Milky Way, the Great Pyramids and their relationship to the River Nile reflect the sky of 12,500 years ago, not 4,500 years ago. We have very complicated situations here. Ground pattern, speaking of what the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi the first time, 12,500 plus years ago, and the star shafts connecting also to the time of the ancient Egyptians and so on. So no wonder it's a difficult monument to figure out, but it speaks to both epochs. As I say, we could say that the ancient Egyptians themselves had a sufficiently advanced knowledge of precession to be able to visualize the skies of 8,000 years previously. That would be a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But then we're confronted with the problem of the Sphinx. I mentioned that lion-bodied monument. That lion monument that I believe stood there 12,500 years ago, looking at the rising sun when it was housed by the constellation of Leo. That lion monument has been subjected to thousands of years of erosion. And I want to pay tribute to the brilliant work of two individuals. The late, great John Anthony West, dear friend of mine, the first to raise the possibility that the Great Sphinx had been subjected to some kind of water weathering, and that creates a problem in itself, because 4,500 years ago, the Giza Plateau was as dry and as waterless as it is today. And then Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, and kudos to Robert Schoch for putting his reputation as an established academic on the line, and looking at the geology of that site, and coming to the conclusion, and publishing the conclusion, that the Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall. Not flood, but precipitation, rainfall coming from above, selectively hollowing out the softer areas of rock and leaving the harder areas of rock in place. And it's that precipitation-induced weathering that you see more in the trench around the Great Sphinx now than you see on the Sphinx itself, because the Sphinx has been constantly restored. This is one of the anomalies. We know that some of the restoration blocks were put there in the time of the pharaoh who's supposed to have been responsible for the Sphinx, and not a single document tells us that he was responsible. That's just another Egyptological fantasy, actually. The erosion patterns on the Great Sphinx. Thank you.
Are you a Trackmania fan?
And the risks he took.
I have Trackmania on my Xbox.
You publish
I
something
might
out of line,
stream that sometime soon
but he
too.
took that risk and he
It's a
published
fun
that
game.
work and he's documented it thoroughly.
It's pretty
He's
enraging though. The
Great
physics
Sphinx was subjected to
are a
about
little
1,000 years of heavy
too
rain.
sensitive, I
That's
think.
the only time you find that
I think
heavy rainfall
gravity
on
has
the Giza
more of a
Plateau
real
is
life
the
effect.
between roughly
But then again,
12,800
the speeds
and
might just be so
11,600
insanely
You certainly didn't
fast.
find it 4,500 years ago.
But I think they
It's
underestimate gravity in their physics model.
very heavily eroded.
I
In
think
the
it
time
makes
of
it
the
less
ancient
fun.
Egyptians, they looked at that massive leonine head, which was so damaged and so eroded, almost unrecognizable, and they recarved what was left of it into the head of a human being, wearing the Nemes headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh. But that is a recarving of a much more ancient monument. That's a restoration that was done on it. And we don't know which pharaoh it's supposed to represent. Egyptologists like to think that it represents Kafka. There's no compelling evidence for that whatsoever. So a lion-bodied monument, once a lion-headed monument, that now takes the form of the lion-bodied Great Sphinx with a recarved human head that's way out of proportion to the scale of the rest of the body of that 270-foot-long monument. The head is so tiny in comparison with the rest.
Right.
And the ancient Egyptians didn't get things out of proportion unless there was a very good reason to do so. And I think they were restoring a very damaged and much older layer.
Is there not a hidden chamber as well under the Sphinx?
Yes. While work was allowed to be done, John Anthony West and Robert Schoch were both involved in this work back in 1992. They did a seismic survey around the Sphinx, and they identified a very large geometrical chamber, about 15 feet beneath the forepaws of the Sphinx.
Wow.
20 feet beneath the forepaws. Could be a natural cavity, but the rectangular form of it suggests strongly that human beings
Was dug out or something.
Yeah, but it was.
Are you serious?
And in fact, there is a whole
Bro,
underworld at Giza. This
it's
is beginning to be
amazing.
recognized. So
Fucking legend.
Osiris is an example of
no
that
way. Are you
subterranean
serious,
chamber
Canadian?
beneath the Great
What?
Pyramid, for example. There's
Are you
I think there's
serious,
a lot more
bro?
remains to be discovered under the
Fucking legend.
Have they LiDAR?
It's such a competitive
well,
game.
LiDAR in that case wouldn't help.
That is
because
that's like
there's no
exponentially
canopy.
more
It doesn't need
competitive than
Oh, I see.
GoldenEye.
What is needed
I'm
is,
sorry to
is,
say.
is seismic tomography.
Right.
You're number one. Wow, that's
And,
insane. In
that
Canada.
will show you a picture of what is
Bro,
what is
that's
underneath
insane.
the Giza Plateau. And whatever
Did you
that's
play
being
on?
done,
Did you play on
it's
computer,
identified
Xbox?
chambers, passageways, corridors, and not enough is being said about this. And I don't know what's going on. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think
You don't think
I
there's,
don't
like,
think
some
that
grander-
Egyptologists are in a conspiracy to hide the truth. I think they're just so locked into their paradigm that they can't see what's
They
there.
feel like they've got it figured out.
They've got
They
it
have
figured out.
No reason to waste resources.
Exactly. No reason to waste your resources, and they don't want to get mixed up in any way with this crowd of kind of quote-unquote New Age thinkers like Graham Hancock.
Right, right. So have you, because there's this idea about this chamber beneath the Sphinx being potentially this hall of records. And
Wow.
that was put forth by
Crazy.
Edgar Casey, I believe.
It
through-
was.
Green
which is
Metal
one
is
of the
author
reasons that
time,
they
right?
Yeah.
distance themselves from it. Although weird. Both Mark Lehner,
But
who's-
you've got a lot of knowledge around this subject, Edgar Casey.
well, first of all, the fact that Edgar Casey was a healer. He used to fall into a trance-like state. And in that trance-like state, primarily what he did was offer remedies for people's ailments.
Man, I might just like play
But
some
from time to
Trackmania
time,
right
he would
now,
start talking
honestly.
about Atlantis and about the lost civilization, prehistoric antiquity. And he said that the Hall of Records of Atlantis lay beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx. Well, immediately
I'm not
for
gonna do it right now.
scientifically minded
If I sign
Egyptologists, this is
off, I'm
something
gonna go to
get
sleep.
far away from.
This is nutty guy.
But I'll
So
do
they
it
kind of neglect the fact that there
in
are
the next
ancient
few
Egyptian
days. I'll do a
texts
Trackmania
that
stream.
speak
It'll be cool.
precisely of the whole. I don't know. Edgar Casey didn't know about this stuff.
Right.
He was
that's the thing.
tapping in from some other realm into this. But that's one of the reasons that Egyptologists have distanced themselves so much from from the notion that there might be something hidden there.
Bro,
Oddly
that's
enough,
still
both
insane.
Mark Lehner, who
The
is leading
tax
American
beast, cool.
geologist,
Take a photo of that.
doing work around the Great Sphinx and on the Giza Plateau, and Zahi Hawass, who's the leading Egyptian Egyptologist doing work around the Giza Plateau.
Oh wow,
Both of
insane,
them
bro. That's
Were
insane.
sent through college by the Egyptians.
Really?
That's a legendary, man.
Robert
What do you
Bavard and I
play
published
on?
this in our 1996
Oh,
book, The
PS4.
Message of the Sphinx.
Awesome.
It was published in America as The Message of the Sphinx and in Britain as Keeping Genesis, and we documented it. It's all there if anybody wants to check it out. Very rapidly afterwards, they distanced themselves completely from the Edgar Casey observation, but until quite recently, Zahi Hawass was still giving lectures at the Edgar Casey, while at the same time insisting that he had nothing to do with any of these so-called crazy ideas.
Bro, that's legendary,
You know,
man.
it's a very curious thing. And
What do you think about
of
my
course people have the
comment
right to change their mind.
Yeah.
Perhaps
that gravity
all that happens.
is
As I say, I
nice? I don't know why nice,
I
but
don't see a need for conspiracy when
I don't know
there's
if
already this
gravity is
mindset
just too
that
weak,
just rules out any
or
other
the game is just
possibilities.
too
It's the mindset
sensitive.
of institutional archaeology, not
Especially
necessarily
on like the
shared by all
roads that are
individual
shaped like this.
archaeologists,
It's
but
just
is
it
the
doesn't
narrative they want
doesn't
to
make it
carry.
fun.
What I've observed,
Because when
particularly
you turn,
in the
I
reaction
don't know. Maybe I
to-
just gotta get
to
good.
the Netflix series, which was seen by huge numbers of people all around the world, is that what
Oh, no
most
way.
disturbed archaeologists about it was that here
Really,
was a narrative that wasn't theirs. They weren't controlling that narrative anymore. They thought they had it taped, and they were controlling the narrative in every possible way. And suddenly, reaching out to a huge audience.
out of spite or out of
somebody they didn't
accident.
like anyway,
Right.
me.
They wish it was one of them. That was.
I think so.
Yeah.
Or rather, more than that, they want to remain the high priests of the past. They don't. I certainly don't want to be the high priest of the past. All I want to do is to point out that there are certain problems in mainstream study of the past which require questioning and investigation. And the questions I've asked and the conclusion I've come to is that we are a species.
I might
with
play
a
for like another like
that there has been a forgotten episode in the human story, and that
maybe
episode
5
is
more
a
minutes,
film
maybe
that
less.
I'm not seeing because it doesn't fit the prevailing
Track
mainstream narrative.
master
Now,
medal,
those
yeah.
archaeologists were furiously angry with me. I had this huge platform, Netflix to
encouraging to hear.
that's why they
You say that.
campaigned to have Netflix,
Legend.
relabeled a series of
not a
science
documentary.
fiction.
Yeah.
You know, that's what the archaeologists were
Telling stories.
That's what archaeologists were claiming. They wanted to get back control of the narrative. But one thing that has to be remembered
sorry, brother.
is that archaeology has a iron death grip on the narrative of our past. The
I
fact that I
really
had a
am.
Netflix series and Netflix is a big platform doesn't begin to compare with the fact that the findings, the conclusions, the narrative of mainstream archaeology informs everything that we are taught through the school and education system, right up to university, about the past. Everything we're taught about prehistory
Sorry, brother.
reflects the narrative of mainstream archaeology. So against that huge weight, and also most TV programs about, whether it's about ancient Egypt or other prehistoric subjects, are again informed by
Another day, I would love to hear it. Another day.
reflect the narrative of
I think I'm gonna sign off now.
So
I
just
might
by dissenting from
at least
and
boot up the
offering an
Xbox.
alternative point of view, let's think
I
about
might
things a bit differently.
stream
Let's consider whether
Media.
archaeology really
Maybe.
does know everything.
I might not too.
That led to an enormous amount of fury and anger projected against them. But what it also led to was a worldwide conversation that many people who hadn't been exposed to my work
Thank you
were
for being here. Thank you for being you.
I want to make clear that, first of all, I couldn't do anything I do without the work that archaeologists have done, the groundwork that archaeologists have done. And secondly, I'm not alone. There are a number of other people.
Oh no
working
way,
in the field.
Kratos
John
was
Anthony
playing.
West
We
is
gotta
one,
rate
Robert Smith
Kratos.
is another, Robert Boval, huge.
No, we
knowledge
gotta
of
we're gonna do
archaeology.
elusive boost.
John Major Jenkins dealing with the Mayan calendar. Many others. John Major Jenkins has sadly passed away. Many others are working in this field. I'm just one of a number of people who are bothered by problems in the past and are trying to find answers to that problem. And some people think that the answer is extraterrestrial visitors. I don't think that's the answer, but who knows?
Well, they have a whole show too. So
yeah, they have a whole show too. That's that's not my thing. But I think
no
what's
way.
right and
Sorry,
proper,
brother.
is to be mystified by the past and the things that aren't properly
Okay,
explained
catch you soon.
by the mainstream model. And I think that model needs to be challenged. And this is how, ultimately, in all of